3 million years ago, when the first groups of early humans began to emerge on Earth, our protagonist was among them. At first glance, he appeared to be just another Australopithecus, but there was something distinct about him, an unusual obsession with hunting. The main character thought he was like everyone else, but he soon realized something was amiss. While those around him aged, weakened, and eventually died, he remained unchanged. No matter what happened, he simply wouldn't die. As eons passed, he stayed the same, well, not entirely the same. While time left no visible marks on him, his body continued to evolve, growing larger, stronger, and more powerful. The only things that sustained him during this endless passage of time were hunting, fighting, and battling anyone or anything he deemed worthy. Cursed with eternal life and unbearable loneliness, these pursuits were his only sources of joy. For nearly 3 million years, he lived this way, his body evolving daily, becoming increasingly formidable. Eventually, he reached an unparalleled level of strength, earning him the title of the God of Earth. His power grew to such an extent that he defeated every other deity, claiming the title of the strongest in the divine realm. However, as time went on, things began to change. With no worthy challengers left, his once thrilling days of combat turned into an endless stretch of boredom. To express his frustration with the monotony of his routine, he raised his foot and slammed it down on the ground. The entire dwelling of the gods, resembling a small planet, shook violently from the impact, causing the divine realm to tremble, leaving every god, angel, and even the malevolent beings within it terrified. This wasn't the first time he had caused such chaos, and some gods could hardly endure the daily disruption. Among them was Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Unbothered by the turmoil he was creating, the god of Earth was consumed by a thought that had tormented him for centuries. He had defeated every worthy opponent without breaking a sweat, and it had been over 1,000 years since he faced anyone who could challenge him. Letting out a deep sigh, he muttered to himself, "Being too strong is a problem." As those words left his mouth, a revelation struck him. After a millennium of frustration, he felt enlightened. If his strength was the issue, then the solution was clear: he needed to find a way to weaken himself. In his mind, it was obvious: if he had a frail body like the Earthlings, he would have countless opponents to fight. Suddenly, he stood up and shouted, "Dragonling!" Out of nowhere, a massive dragon appeared in the sky above him and descended with a thunderous landing. The dragon towered at least 5 times higher than God Mu's throne and seemed less than thrilled about being summoned. However, the glowing eyes of the dragon belonged to Dragonling, the top god's assistant. Changing his demeanor, the dragon let out a deep growl and asked why he had been called. To his surprise, God Mu simply began walking away, casually instructing Dragonling to handle matters in his absence. However, things didn't unfold as Mu had anticipated. Out of nowhere, the dragon cast a powerful spell, binding the Absolute, and boldly shackled God Mu in an attempt to restrain him. But the moment Mu turned his head and shot him an angry glance, the dragon's fierce and wild attitude melted away, leaving him frightened and ashamed. Stammering, the dragon attempted to explain himself, saying he hadn't meant to offend his lord, but that Mu should have at least provided an explanation, especially with a god's meeting approaching. Mu, however, couldn't have cared less about the meeting. Without uttering another word, he began walking again, dragging the dragon along as if the chains were nothing. Seeing his initial plan fail, Mu's assistant quickly shifted tactics, adopting a victim-like stance. He whined that if Mu didn't attend the meeting, he would be stuck dealing with the other gods' endless complaints about Mu's behavior. In response, Mu effortlessly broke the binding spell as if it were nothing. He turned to the dragon and shouted that he wouldn't go anywhere unless the dragon agreed to fight him right then and there. This was all it took to completely change the assistant's demeanor. Realizing that facing the other god's blame was far preferable to being torn apart by God Mu, the dragon immediately wished him a safe and brief trip. Mu smirked and walked toward what appeared to be a small version of Earth floating nearby. Stretching out his hand, he touched its surface and began to ponder whose body he should inhabit on Earth. To simplify his decision, he started eavesdropping on the messages the Earthlings were sending to the gods. Most were trivial and dull, but one particular message caught his attention. It questioned his very existence. Initially annoyed, it didn't take long for Mu to realize that this person was the perfect choice to start his journey on Earth. For the first time in 1,000 years, he felt genuine excitement. He had finally found a solution to his endless boredom. While Mu couldn't have been happier, his assistant looked far less enthusiastic. For a brief moment, Mu considered giving some kind of explanation before leaving, but true to his Sigma personality, he decided against it. Much to the dragon's surprise, he simply said goodbye, entrusted the realm to him, and told him to handle anyone who might show up in his absence. The dragon felt a mix of worry and frustration as he realized what was happening. God Mu was merely sending his soul to Earth while leaving his body behind. Concerned, the dragon tried to remind him of the risks. If something were to happen to Mu's body while he was gone, his separated soul would also perish on Earth. But Mu had already made up his mind, confident that no one in the divine realm would dare harm him. Despite the dragon's attempts to dissuade him with words, Mu brushed off his assistant's concerns and did what he wanted, as always. Without further explanation, the scene abruptly shifted. It wasn't Mu anymore but someone entirely different, someone who had just defeated the demon lord after a grueling battle. The feeling of victory was overwhelming, and the individual couldn't have been happier. But it wasn't real life, it was just the final scene of a video game that a player had finished moments ago. That player was a 17-year-old outcast named Lee Ho. Lee was painfully envious of the heroes in every video game he played, those fortunate protagonists who always managed to attract hordes of cute girls during their ridiculous adventures. As he stared at the game credits rolling on his screen, he couldn't help but sigh, wishing his life were anything like theirs. Lee suddenly released his phone, and it slipped from his hand, plummeting to the ground below in mere seconds. The device crashed loudly, shattering into countless pieces. It was clear why Lee Ho was standing on the edge of a 3-story building, ready to end his life. He felt he had nothing left to live for. His body trembled, covered in injuries, as he whispered a bitter farewell to this cruel and unfair world before leaping off the edge. As he fell, the wind whipped past him, and Lee screamed with tear-filled eyes, crying out from the depths of his despair, "If there's a God out there, now's your chance to prove it. Send me to another world." Before he could finish his plea, he hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood splattered everywhere as his head struck the pavement. By all accounts, he should have been dead. But then something strange occurred. Lee's hands twitched and shook uncontrollably, his chest heaving as he began breathing heavily, as if he had just been pulled from drowning. Unbeknownst to him, God Mu's soul had possessed his body in the blink of an eye, just before impact. Now, Mu was forced to endure the excruciating pain of Lee's broken and battered body, completely unaware of what had just transpired. Meanwhile, Lee's soul was transported to the divine realm. He stood there, utterly shocked, his jaw nearly dropping to the floor. What stunned him wasn't just that he was in an otherworldly place, but that he was face to face with a towering dragon that did not look pleased to see him. The shock was mutual. The dragon was equally taken aback, having not expected to encounter a human so soon in the divine realm. Similarly, Lee had certainly not anticipated that the first thing he would see after dying would be a massive, angry dragon glaring at him. Now, let's rewind and see what truly happened just 10 seconds before this entire incident unfolded. God Mu stood there with his signature smirk, lightly touching the surface of the mini-Earth before him. As previously mentioned, he was not the least bit concerned about leaving his defenseless body behind. He was overly confident, to a fault. The dragonling tried to warn him, urging him to think it through, but Mu, reckless as ever, brushed off the warnings as if they were nothing. Without a second thought, he sent his soul hurtling toward Earth, swapping places with Lee's soul. The very next moment, the unexpected occurred. As soon as Mu's soul entered Lee's body, he realized he was in a dire life-or-death situation. There was no time to adjust or receive a warning. He was mid-air, plummeting toward the ground at lightning speed. Less than a second, that was all the time he had to process the danger he was in. Then it happened. Lee's body hit the ground with such incredible force that it was almost unbelievable. The impact was catastrophic, bones shattered, and the body was flung backward like a rag doll before finally coming to rest. The pain was beyond anything Mu had ever experienced in his immortal life. But the pain wasn't the worst part. What truly overwhelmed him was the sheer confusion. Why did this happen? The moment he set foot, or rather, soul, on Earth, how did he end up in such a mess so quickly? None of it made any sense. His hands trembled uncontrollably as shock coursed through his borrowed body. But then, suddenly, everything went still. His hands ceased shaking, and in that chilling silence, the realization hit him: he was dying. There was no chance to change his fate, no time to fix what was broken. Just like that, his lifeless body collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving ground. The area was eerily quiet, with no one around to witness the downfall of what was once a proud and mighty god. No one to help, no one to even notice. However, this wasn't the end for God Mu, not yet. As you may know, some human muscles move without conscious control. These are called involuntary muscles, like the heart and internal organs. For Mu, who had spent 3 million years training his body, he had reached the absolute peak of understanding the human form. This allowed him to consciously control every part of his body, including his blood vessels and internal organs. Nothing was off limits for him. Just a few seconds after dying, his heart began to beat again. The pain was excruciating, even for someone like Mu, but by forcing his blood to circulate and repairing his heart, he managed to stop the bleeding. Slowly but surely, Mu began to rise to his feet as if nothing had happened, even though his entire body screamed in pain. Instead of feeling anger about the chaotic situation, Mu found himself oddly happy. Beaten up and covered in blood, he realized it had been so long since he felt anything like this. This sensation convinced him he'd made the right choice in coming here. His next move was to sift through Lee's memories to understand what kind of life this guy had been leading. It didn't take long for him to learn everything about Lee. With that knowledge, Mu decided to head back to Lee's home, his new base, to figure out his next steps. Surprisingly, Mu found it challenging to walk with Lee's weak and injured legs. So, like an ape, he used his hands for support, moving faster and taking some pressure off his legs. Not long after, he finally reached Lee's house. The first thing he noticed was that a cat had left a mess right in front of the window. As soon as he entered the small, basement-like house, Mu sat down on the creaky bed and began reflecting on what he had learned about Lee's life. According to Lee's memories, he had only one male relative, who lived far away. Mu quickly realized that the guy he had chosen not only lived alone but was also poor and utterly miserable. His only occupation seemed to be attending a place called school. What amused Mu the most was the memory of someone at school who seemed to have made it their mission to bully Lee. This person not only picked fights with him constantly but also went out of their way to make Lee's life a living hell. This was exactly the kind of starting point Mu had hoped for, messy, chaotic, and full of potential challenges. He couldn't be happier about it. Feeling a surge of excitement, Mu threw a random punch into the air to celebrate, but the moment he did, a sharp, unexpected pain shot through his right arm, as if the muscles had torn apart. Something was definitely wrong. Mu figured the pain in his arm was likely due to overusing his hand muscles while awkwardly crawling home. It became clear that this body hadn't seen much action. The first thing Mu noticed was that Lee had almost never used his arm muscles for anything strenuous, so even the simplest effort left them sore. Still, instead of feeling frustrated or angry about being stuck in such a weak body, Mu smirked. In fact, he was genuinely happy to feel pain like this. After thousands of years without it, the next day, police discovered the bloodstains and shattered glass at the site where Lee Ho's body had crashed to the ground. They quickly cordoned off the area, prohibiting anyone from entering as they launched their investigation. Meanwhile, Mu casually returned to the crash scene, not to check on the investigation, but because the three-story building nearby was Lee's school, and Mu had decided to keep up with Lee's daily routine. He strolled into the school, scanning the halls until he found Lee's classroom. His excitement got the better of him as he slid the door open with excessive force, causing it to rebound and slam back into him, leaving Mu momentarily stunned. His triumphant entrance was completely ruined. Muttering to himself, he stepped into the classroom, drawing the attention of one of Lee's classmates. The boy immediately frowned at the noise, shooting Mu an irritated glare and calling him an idiot, telling him to keep it down. Upon hearing this, Mu momentarily forgot the pain in his face and walked toward the boy, stopping right in front of him and standing uncomfortably close. This left the boy momentarily shocked, but it wasn't Lee's weak and frail appearance that surprised him, it was the unsettling, creepy smile on Mu's face. In that moment, Mu recognized the boy as the bully from Lee's memories, the one who had always made his life miserable. The bully, completely unaware that Lee Ho was no longer the same person, scoffed and mocked him, saying, "What's wrong with you, huh? Did you leave your glasses at home, or are you just too blind and stupid to act normal today?" Before Mu could respond, the boy swung his fist and punched him square in the face, as if to reassert his dominance over Lee. The punch landed hard, blood beginning to drip from Mu's nose and mouth, pooling on the floor beneath him. The bully smirked, clearly proud of himself, and taunted him again, "What happened to your glasses? Did you sell them for cash, or did you just lose them like the idiot you are?" Even with blood running down his face, Mu didn't flinch. He stood there calmly, unfazed by the punch. In matters of fighting, Mu had his own unshakable rules. A proper and honorable fight could only begin when all parties involved had willingly shown their intent to fight. Right now, Mu was waiting for the right moment to respond. Always ready to face any opponent, be it a god, a beast, or a human, his only concern was confirming his opponent's intent. Mu chose to confirm that intent simply by standing still and taking the first strike. That's exactly what happened here. After absorbing the punch, a familiar excitement and satisfied smile spread across Mu's face. Without hesitation, he sprang into action, interrupting the bully mid-sentence with a sudden punch aimed directly at him. The boy, completely caught off guard, took the punch squarely, just as Mu had moments before. But as Mu pulled his hand back, a sharp, unbearable pain shot through his arm. His muscles felt like they were tearing apart again, a brutal reminder that this was not his indestructible, godly body, but a fragile, weak human one. The commotion quickly caught the attention of the teacher, who stormed over, shouting angrily and demanding that they stop fighting immediately. However, the noise had also drawn the interest of the entire class, with heads turning, curious and intrigued by the sight of a fight breaking out in the middle of the room. The bully, feeling humiliated and furious after being punched by a nerd for the first time, could no longer contain his anger. Ignoring the teacher's shouts and the watching crowd, he charged straight at Mu, ready to unleash his fury. Mu immediately tried to defend himself, managing to block most of the attacks, well, kind of. While he defended himself, he couldn't help but think that he would have ended this fight long ago if his new body could actually keep up with him. For a brief moment, he considered using some of his godly powers, but to his shock, they didn't work. That moment of disbelief distracted him, and before he knew it, he took another punch to the face. At least this one wasn't as hard as the last. The bully was determined not to back down from someone he believed was still Lee, and he aimed to make him regret throwing that first punch. On the other hand, Mu found himself in a tough spot. He couldn't muster the strength to fight back with this weak body. Without punches, kicks, or his godly powers, he was left with only one option. In a sudden move, he lowered his head, aiming at a specific spot, and took the incoming punch directly on his skull. The bones of his skull were the only part of his new body he could rely on. Just as he expected, the bully's fist slammed into his head, causing the impact to break the bones in his fingers. The pain was so intense that the bully screamed like a baby, and in that moment, Mu couldn't help but feel like an absolute genius. To put an end to this ridiculous fight, Mu decided to capitalize on the bully's distraction before he could recover. This time, he rushed forward, grabbing the bully's hand in a sudden move. Without wasting a second, he used his head to strike, aiming directly for the bully's stomach, or maybe even his groin, knowing those weak spots. The bully was caught completely off guard, unable to handle yet another wave of unbearable pain. But Mu wasn't done yet. He wanted to ensure this guy would never forget this day. With another swift move, he raised his head and slammed it into the bully's jaw. This time, the pain was too much for the bully to withstand. His eyes rolled back, and he dropped to his knees in front of Mu like a defeated loser before finally passing out. All of this happened while the rest of the class stood there in shock, recording the entire fight. Watching the weakest guy in school take down one of the biggest bullies was hard for anyone to believe. But for Mu, things were different. He had just fought someone for the first time in thousands of years, using every bit of strength he could muster, and the feeling was incredible. However, now wasn't the time to celebrate. As his excitement faded, the pain from all the hits he'd taken rushed in all at once. He could taste the sticky metallic flavor of blood in his mouth. At first, it didn't seem like something even God Mu could handle easily, but it only took a moment for him to realize something surprising. He was more than okay with it. After such a long, hard time, it actually felt satisfying to experience. The thrill of a good fight lingered in the air. A few moments later, as Mu's excitement settled, he stared at the unconscious boy's body, feeling as if he wasn't quite done with him yet. He sat down next to the bully, and for some reason, perhaps due to the tough fight he had just endured, he thanked him. Then, in a completely unexpected move, Mu leaned in, lowered his head, and bit the boy's ear, causing blood to splatter everywhere. But Mu didn't just bite, he actually tore off a small piece of it and spat it onto the ground right in front of his horrified classmates. Shock filled the air. None of the students could believe what Mu had just done. It was akin to watching a madman. However, Mu didn't care at all about anyone's reactions. He calmly wiped the blood off his face, still glaring at the boy's body, which hadn't twitched even after losing part of his ear. This wild act of biting off the bully's ear was Mu's way of leaving a mark on his opponent, someone who had given him a fight he truly enjoyed. It was his twisted way of showing gratitude while also marking them as someone worthy of his attention. These opponents would later come to be known as Mu's playthings. It was clear that only strong opponents who provided exciting battles could earn a spot on this list. Back then, being labeled as one of Mu's playthings was almost like a badge of honor, a symbol of strength. Ironically, it was similar to how humans in some eras would mark animals to show they had been neutered, but Mu's mark was about recognition, not humiliation. Soon enough, the story of the second-year bully who got beaten by the weakest guy in school spread like wildfire. The most shocking part wasn't just that the bully got defeated, it was that he had essentially been neutered. The boy's condition was so dire that they had no choice but to call emergency medical services to attend to him. Like all the other curious students, Mu watched as they transferred Lee's classmate to the hospital. Of course, Mu didn't care about the bully's health. He was more intrigued by how they managed to call for help so quickly using just a mobile phone. As the ambulance drove off, Mu waved goodbye to his first opponent, hoping to meet him again someday. At that moment, one of the teachers, absolutely furious, appeared behind him and ordered him to follow him to the teacher's office. The moment they arrived, the teacher exploded, yelling at Mu and demanding to know if he had completely lost his mind. He wanted to understand why Mu had done something so wild and reckless to his classmate. At one point, the teacher's anger boiled over, and he attempted to hit Mu with the binder in his hand, but Mu didn't flinch. He didn't even move an inch. Not only was he unbothered by the threat of punishment, but he also looked excited, even thrilled, as if he were already contemplating the chance to fight another opponent soon. Seeing Mu's expression made the teacher reconsider. He stopped his hand midair, not wanting to risk the same fate as the student in the hospital. Instead of punishing him, the teacher turned around and told Mu, who he believed to be Lee, to bring his parents to school the following day. Mu had braced himself for the impact, expecting to be hit by the teacher, but when the anticipated punishment didn't come, he gave up on the idea of fighting back. Just then, the teacher dismissed him, saying he could leave school earlier than the others without elaborating further. Mu did as instructed and left the school, making his way to Lee's house. His mind wandered. Unlike other gods who possessed complete knowledge of the worlds they governed, Mu was uncertain about what the teacher meant by leave earlier. Was it a suggestion to return to his base, or something else entirely? Since nothing else made sense, he assumed it was simply that and decided to use this unexpected free time to heal from his earlier injuries and train his fragile new body. If he wanted to face more opponents in the future, he needed to grow stronger. His hand was visibly shaking from the pain he had sustained, and at that moment, he wished he could use some of his godly powers, like mana, to heal himself faster. As Mu understood it, mana was a force beyond the capabilities of most humans. In some places, it was referred to as chi or chakra, but most gods called it mana. In simple terms, mana was the life force that existed everywhere in nature, granting humans extraordinary abilities that allowed them to become hunters in some worlds, wizards in others, or powerful players in different realms. However, here in this world, Mu couldn't rely on it, no matter how much he wanted to. For now, he would have to endure the pain and focus on adapting to his new life and body. He tried once again to channel his mana, but it vanished within seconds. This reminded him of that moment during his earlier battle when he had also tried and failed to use it. Frustrated, he finally realized he needed to focus solely on training his physical body and rely entirely on it from now on. Before long, Mu arrived at Lee's home and collapsed onto the bed. Knowing that his recovery would take time and there wasn't much he could do about it, he decided to return to the god realm to see what was happening there. In an instant, just like the day he first came to Earth, his soul shifted back to his original body. As soon as Mu regained consciousness, his eyes widened in shock. Right in front of him, Lee Ho was choking the dragonling, refusing to let the poor creature go. The weak boy who had always been bullied on Earth now turned to God Mu. As soon as Lee noticed him, he released the dragon and approached Mu with newfound confidence, demanding that Mu hand over the dragonling. Lee didn't know who Mu truly was. He had no idea he was speaking to a god. All he understood was that he was temporarily in this realm and would eventually leave again. He wanted to take control of the dragonling, thinking he could use it to dominate in his new life. However, Mu didn't appreciate Lee's arrogant and commanding attitude. Without hesitation, he summoned a godly hand and tightly grasped Lee, making it clear that he couldn't just order around his lord like that. Lee was completely shocked. He hadn't expected this at all. But Mu didn't care about his protests or complaints and started dragging him away without a second thought. Mu had decided to give the boy a second chance at life in another world, but the look on his face suggested he had something else in mind. Minutes later, they arrived at the domain of Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu entered confidently, his firm step signaling to anyone nearby that he was there. Of course, there was no one else around except Lucifer himself, who, unlike Mu, was diligently keeping a close eye on his planet, Elmer. Mu marched straight into Lucifer's castle without bothering to ask for permission, walking in as casually as if Lucifer were just an ordinary guy. Lucifer wasn't pleased with Mu's rude behavior. Without giving them a chance to explain why they were there, he immediately rejected whatever it was they wanted, not even bothering to listen. But Mu didn't care about Lucifer's opinion in the slightest. He flatly demanded that Lucifer open the gate because he was about to send Lee to the planet Elmer. As expected, Lucifer reminded him that Elmer wasn't Mu's planet, so he had no right to make such a decision. However, Mu wasn't having any of it. He leaned in and reminded Lucifer who the stronger god was in this scenario, making it clear that he could do whatever he wanted. To drive his point home, Mu added that if Lucifer doubted his strength, he was more than ready to prove it anytime, anywhere. Poor Lucifer knew he was no match for Mu, and he couldn't help but tremble in frustration. Seeing Lucifer hesitate and waste time, Mu stepped forward, deciding to take matters into his own hands. As he approached and touched the surface of Elmer's planet, Lucifer, caught off guard, quickly reminded Mu that interfering with another god's domain was strictly forbidden. He warned Mu that if a god not in charge of a domain touched it, an unbreakable barrier would activate, blocking all access. Just as Lucifer had predicted, the barrier appeared. But to his complete disbelief, Mu effortlessly shattered it in seconds, something Lucifer never thought possible. Shocked, Lucifer stared at Mu, who calmly remarked that the rules of the universe could be changed easily if someone truly wanted to change them. Mu then opened his godly hand and released Li, urging him to step forward and leap into the hole he had created on Elmer's planet. Li hesitated, clearly scared, but Mu reminded him that this was what he had always asked for, and now the opportunity was right in front of him. Once again, Li asked Mu to give him the dragonling so he could dominate in his new life, but Mu showed no intention of handing over his assistant and instead forcefully shot Li into Elmer's planet, sending him off to his new life. Afterward, Mu couldn't help but wonder why kids these days didn't want to work for what they wanted, expecting everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. With things settled and nothing else to do, Mu turned to Lucifer and casually told him to take good care of the kid before departing. On the other hand, Lucifer, humiliated and seething with anger, could only wish for the power to tear Mu limb from limb. Lucifer's story wasn't so different from Mu's. He was once known as the first demon lord in history, standing above all life on Elmer's planet after claiming the title of the strongest. In his arrogance, he dared to challenge the god who ruled over his world. In the first moments of their battle, Lucifer summoned a blinding light that transformed into a massive sword, far larger than the god himself, and hurled it straight at him. Even the god couldn't withstand the sheer power of the attack and was struck down, split in two by the massive sword, unable to dodge or defend himself. After defeating that god, Lucifer took his place but found it unsatisfying. He challenged every other god in the divine realm, defeating them one by one and claiming the ultimate throne as the god of gods, absolute, invincible, a supreme legend among them all. Before long, he earned everyone's respect, something he believed he truly deserved. But his days of glory didn't last. One day, Mu showed up and beat him, just as he had crushed all the others before him, completely destroying Lucifer's mighty image in front of everyone. Consumed by rage and humiliation, Lucifer vowed to get revenge for this disgrace, cursing Mu as a human-born bastard in his fury. Back in the present, Mu was casually riding atop his dragonling, heading toward his domain, completely unaware that something in the sky was secretly watching him. A demon, most likely sent by Lucifer, was spying on him to figure out what Mu was up to, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back, just like Lucifer, who was counting down the minutes for his chance to avenge his humiliation. Just like Lucifer who's counting down the minutes for his chance to get revenge for his humiliation. The bully from Li's school, who had just regained consciousness, was eager to see Li dead. Still lying in his hospital bed, he grabbed his phone and decided to call someone tougher to teach Li a lesson. Fueled by burning anger, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the person he was looking for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, someone was hard at work on a punching bag. That someone was Kong Cheol, the youth division middleweight boxing champion. His intense training session was suddenly interrupted by an obnoxiously loud ringtone. Annoyed, Kong stopped mid-punch, sweat dripping down his body, and turned to see whose phone was making the ridiculous noise. That's when a blonde guy walked in and casually mentioned it was his phone. He strolled over, picked it up, and answered, sounding irritated. The caller was none other than the beaten bully, desperation evident in his voice. Without any introduction, he told Kong that he would buy him a new phone if he could do one small favor first. Initially surprised by the request, Kong thought it sounded like an easy and good deal, so he agreed and asked what he needed to do in return. The next day, during class, everything seemed normal again as the bully walked in as if nothing had happened the day before. As he made his way to his seat, the entire classroom suddenly fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. Soon, murmurs and whispers filled the room as students talked about how someone who used to bully others had ended up in such a pathetic state. At first, he tried to ignore it, but when the whispers turned into jokes about him being neutered, he couldn't take it anymore. To show he wasn't someone to mess with, he slammed his backpack on the floor and yelled that he could still take them all down, even after being neutered. He challenged anyone who doubted his strength to fight him. At that moment, the class president, a girl with glasses, stood up and shouted back, telling him to either shut up or leave the classroom. Seeing her dare to talk to him like that only made him angrier. Frustrated that even the class president had the audacity to stand up to him, he completely lost it. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a random chair and attempted to throw it at her, trying to remind everyone they should fear him like they used to. Before he could do anything, the door suddenly swung open, and a massive, hulking teacher walked into the classroom, demanding to know what all the fuss was about. To everyone's surprise, the bully instantly dropped into his seat, acting as if nothing had happened. The teacher looked around and noticed the class president standing there, clearly angry. He asked her what was going on and why she was out of her seat. However, the girl didn't spill the truth. Instead, she quickly returned to her seat and assured him it wasn't anything worth mentioning. The teacher didn't press further, but for some reason, he told the girl to meet him after class, which piqued her curiosity. When the school day ended, she met him as instructed. It turned out he wanted a favor. Since she was the class president and someone he could trust, he asked her to check on Lee Ho, who had been absent that day and wasn't answering his phone. In exchange, the teacher promised to write her a recommendation letter for her senior year. Framed as a request, the girl knew she couldn't exactly say no, so she reluctantly agreed. Before long, she found herself standing in front of Lee's house, looking completely uninterested in whatever situation he might be in. Wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible, she didn't waste any time. She walked up to the door and knocked, calling out to see if anyone was home. When no one responded, she hesitated for a moment before deciding to check if the door was locked. Turning the doorknob, she realized it wasn't. To her surprise, the door swung open, so she slowly stepped inside. The moment she walked in, she froze in shock. Right in front of her was Lee's lifeless body, surrounded by a filthy room where bugs seemed to be playing hide and seek. Lee's appearance was horrifying. His eyes had rolled back completely white, and his mouth was wide open. The sight made the girl scream in terror, thinking Lee was dead. Without wasting another second, she grabbed her phone and called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed Lee to the nearest hospital. It didn't take long for the doctors to determine what had happened. Lee had likely fainted from pure starvation, abandoned by God Mu, who had left his body earlier. He was hospitalized and hooked up to a nutrient for to stabilize him. Just then, something strange occurred. As Lee's body lay still, it suddenly twitched. In an instant, Mu returned to Lee's body. The moment Mu opened his eyes, he felt completely disoriented. The place didn't look familiar at all. Confused, he tried to figure out where he was and how he had ended up there. Before he could make sense of anything, he felt something odd. Looking down, he realized something was attached to his hand. It was the for delivering the nutrient serum. As a god who had lived solely for battle and fighting, Mu had no knowledge of human tools or technology in this era, and this strange serum was no exception. He stared at it with a mix of curiosity and unease, trying to process what was happening. Even though he didn't understand what the serum was, Mu quickly figured out that it was sending something into his body. Thanks to his godly knowledge, he realized it was nutrients, and he could sense his body absorbing them rapidly, speeding up his recovery. To Mu, it felt like some kind of healing magic, though he knew very well it wasn't magic. As Lee started to move his head around and regain consciousness, the girl sitting nearby finally noticed he was awake. However, the creepy smile on his face made her think he looked a little crazy. Still, she asked if Lee knew what had caused him to faint. Not waiting for an answer, she grabbed her bag, stood up, and announced she was heading back to school to report everything to the teacher, as he had asked her to. Mu quickly sat up and tried to stop her. He didn't know who this girl was exactly, but he assumed she was the one who had helped him recover so quickly. However, even after realizing that, he didn't thank her. Instead, in typical Mu fashion, he asked for something else entirely. The girl was in a hurry to leave, but Mu was eager to gather more information about Earth and how people lived there. Pulling the four out of his hand, he gave his usual creepy smile and asked if she knew a place where he could train to get stronger. The girl turned her head slightly and gave him a side glance. Honestly, he looked anything but athletic to her. Coupled with the poor, dirty condition of his house, it didn't seem like he truly cared about sports. Still, after a moment of thought, she suggested a specific place for him, an outdoor gym at a nearby park with some simple workout equipment. Not wasting any time, Mu made his way to the park and began his training. He quickly started doing pull-ups on the bars, pushing his body as hard as he could. When he finally grew tired, he dropped to the ground to take a break. Sweat dripped off his body as he looked around, and Mu couldn't help but feel impressed. To him, these simple pieces of exercise equipment looked like professional training tools. It had been almost 4,000 years since he last set foot on Earth, and after that, he hadn't bothered to check on human progress. As the Earth god, even these basic workout machines left him in awe. Back in his time, humans trained using entirely different, more primitive methods that were far harder and less efficient. This modern equipment, though simple by human standards, was revolutionary in Mu's eyes. He started randomly testing each piece of equipment, even though he had no idea how any of it worked. Suddenly, in the middle of his training, something small, like a pebble, hit him on the back and fell to the ground. To his surprise, it was the beaten bully from earlier, and this time he had brought someone along, a boxer named Hyung. Even with the boxer beside him, the bully acted like a barking dog, yelling insults at Lee from a safe distance but not daring to step closer. Mu couldn't care less about the barking. He calmly sat down, picked up the rock, and asked who had thrown it. Feeling a little braver now that Hyung was there to back him up, the beaten-up guy shouted that he was the one who did it. He began ranting about how Lee would pay for hurting him, bragging about how Hyung, his cousin and a professional boxer, was going to beat Mu to death. But before he could finish, Mu seized an opening and caught him off guard with a sudden punch. The guy hit the ground, screaming in pain as his already broken nose got smashed again. This was the result of starting a fight with God Mu by throwing a stone, and Mu couldn't have been happier about it. While this was happening on Earth, things were a bit more complicated in the realm of the gods. The time for the usual meeting of the gods had arrived, but Mu was nowhere to be seen. His only assistant, the dragonling, had to attend the meeting in his place. With his lord absent, the nervous little dragon stuttered as he awkwardly began to deliver Mu's message. Before the dragonling could even get through the first few words of the letter, Lucifer suddenly interrupted, glaring at the dragon. He demanded to know why a mere assistant dared to step into a meeting meant for gods, let alone speak first. Lucifer's intimidating demeanor scared the poor dragonling out of his wits. Panicking, the dragon quickly clarified that he was only there to deliver a message from God Mu and had no intention of disrespecting or offending anyone with his presence. Determined to fulfill his duty and get out of there before things escalated, the dragonling began to read the letter with a trembling voice. But the message turned out to be nothing out of the ordinary. As usual, Mu was simply asking the gods to let him know if they came across any worthy opponents for him to fight. That was it. Lucifer couldn't hold back his anger after hearing that and slammed the table with a resounding bang. As the second most powerful god in the divine realm, he couldn't stand how Mu not only did whatever he pleased but also ignored the meeting and the gods entirely. Lucifer wasn't wrong, and most of the gods silently agreed with him. However, even in Mu's absence, none of them dared to openly criticize him. Lucifer pressed on, declaring that the gods' meeting was meant to ensure the stability and safety of their worlds. As the third strongest god, and of course as someone already on Mu's list of playthings, the archer god finally spoke up. He argued that if any abnormalities occurred, even on Earth, they were the ones who should always take care of them instead of Mu, and that was the most unacceptable thing for the strongest god among them. Seizing the moment, Lucifer slammed the table again, his voice booming with frustration. He shouted that Mu's habit of treating everything like a game was pushing all the worlds to the brink of collapse. In his opinion, the few times Mu actually decided to resolve something usually ended up making things worse. To make his argument more convincing, Lucifer turned to the god of Cyclops, the ninth-ranked deity in the divine realm, and asked if he remembered what Mu had done 1,000 years ago when the Cyclops planet was on the verge of destruction. Back then, a massive, ugly creature as large as the Cyclops planet itself had attacked a rare being known as a void creature, capable of devouring an entire planet in seconds. Just as the void creature began tearing the Cyclops planet apart, something suddenly shot straight through its center, splitting it into two unequal pieces. That something, of course, was God Mu. With his usual cheerful and flushed face, delighted at the chance for a fight, Mu had effortlessly killed the enormous creature in an instant. Lucifer used this event to drive his point home, trying to make everyone, especially the Cyclops god, see that Mu was to blame for the aftermath of the destruction. He explained that if Mu had cooperated with the other gods instead of acting alone, there wouldn't have been any casualties. Having made his case and likely swaying the other gods to his side, Lucifer declared that they could no longer stand by and let someone unfit to be a god continue risking the safety of their worlds. On the other side, the dragonling was left speechless. He couldn't do or say anything to defend his lord. The only thing he could do was silently pray and beg Mu to return before things spiraled even further out of control. The scene shifted back to Earth, where the beaten bully started making noise again. He barked at Mu, warning him once more that his boxer cousin was going to make him pay for what he had done. Hyung, the so-called boxer cousin, was intrigued. He couldn't help but be a little impressed by how fast Mu had moved and punched earlier. Curiously, he asked if Mu practiced any sports, like martial arts. Mu casually replied that he didn't play any sports because all he wanted was to fight, not play. Mu's response, however, made Hyung think of him as nothing more than an overconfident, dumb middle schooler. Spitting out his chewing gum with a smirk, Hyung took a fighting stance and declared he was ready to fight, just as Mu had apparently wanted. Deciding to start first, Hyung moved quickly to test whether Mu was all talk or actually had some skill. His opening strike was fast and sharp, landing hard on Mu's face before Mu could dodge or block. Despite the satisfaction of landing the first blow, something about Mu stunned Hyung. There was something strange, something downright unusual, about this opponent that sent a chill running up his spine. As an experienced boxer who carefully observed his opponent's movements, Hyung found it odd that Mu didn't move an inch, even though he had clearly been watching the punch come from the start. Like the beaten bully who had hired him, Hyung had no idea that his opponent wasn't human but a god, and not just any god, but one absolutely obsessed with fighting. What Hyung also didn't know was that Mu never dodged a preemptive strike. For him, taking the first hit was like a signal confirming that the battle had officially begun. With his usual unsettling, overly excited grin, Mu suddenly shouted, "Is hand-to-hand combat your favorite thing?" His creepy smile and strange behavior made Hyung wonder if this guy was just some crazy teenager. Then, out of nowhere, Mu mimicked Hyung's fighting stance and launched himself forward. Hyung didn't take it seriously at all, thinking it was just a silly copycat move. When Mu threw a punch, Hyung effortlessly blocked it, or so he thought. The force behind Mu's punch sent Hyung sliding backward, completely surprising him. His hand throbbed in pain from underestimating the strength of this seemingly weak and scrawny guy. Meanwhile, Mu looked even more thrilled. His face lit up with excitement as he realized his attack had worked perfectly just by copying what Hyung had done earlier. However, there was one thing Mu had to keep in mind: his current body wasn't something he could fully rely on just yet. When he tensed his muscles as hard as he could at the moment of impact, the strain left his arms screaming in pain, as if they wanted to quit and take a break. Of course, Mu didn't care about the state of his muscles or how much they were suffering. In fact, the more pain he endured, the more he enjoyed the fight. For him, it only made the battle more satisfying. The thrill of this fight couldn't even compare to the feeling of battling creatures in his godly form. It was raw and exhilarating in a completely different way. Suddenly, to Hyung's surprise, Mu pulled off his belt and wrapped it around his fist. The fact that his current fragile body could cause trouble, especially since recovery and healing would take significantly longer, pushed him to come up with this idea. The beaten bully, still watching from the sidelines, thought using a belt made the fight unfair, but neither Mu nor Hyung cared about his opinion. Hyung rushed forward again, this time fully aware that he couldn't afford to underestimate Mu. He started throwing punches left and right, one after another, trying to overwhelm him with speed and power. Mu managed to block most of the incoming strikes, but even so, he found himself in a rough situation. His movements were limited by the pain in his body, and Hyung's attacks were relentless. In the middle of defending himself, Mu began analyzing his opponent's movements and quickly realized they were fast and precise, but far too predictable. Just by observing Hyung's fighting style, Mu quickly began to anticipate his every move. At first, it was hard to figure out, but less than a minute into the fight, Mu was already dodging Hyung's attacks with ease. If that wasn't enough, when Hyung tried to catch him off guard with a different move, Mu not only blocked the attack but also turned the tables by punching his arm mid-swing. It only took seconds for Hyung to process what had just happened and how his arm ended up broken. He began screaming as the shock wore off and the pain set in. Mu watched him silently, almost amused by his reaction. The screaming made Mu wonder if Hyung and that guy from Lee's class were really cousins, as they seemed to share the same overly dramatic tendencies. Mu didn't waste much time, though. He sealed his victory with another sudden punch to the distracted Hyung, knocking him out cold for a while. The sight left his friend, or cousin, or whoever he was, completely stunned. Things went from bad to worse for him as Mu's face shifted into a frighteningly excited expression, practically radiating his eagerness to fight. He declared it was time to pay for all the trouble caused, especially since this wasn't the first time they had messed with him. The once bully, who had been so arrogant earlier, realized in that moment that with Hyung out of the picture, there was no one left to save him. He had no doubt that a painful fate awaited him now, and there was no escaping it. Mu slowly walked toward Lee's classmate to settle things for the day. As he got closer, Mu noticed that the guy had no intention or will to fight back, and there was no joy or honor in beating up someone who looked so scared. For a moment, the beaten bully sensed Mu's hesitation and thought that if he kept acting this way and simply admitted he didn't want to fight anymore, everything might end peacefully. But it was too late to play the victim now. Before he even had the chance to say anything, Mu punched him in the face in one swift move. After all, this was the same guy who had started today's fight by throwing that small stone and bringing a boxer to take Mu down. He couldn't back out now, and even if he wanted to, Mu had more than enough reason to beat him again. As expected, Mu didn't show any mercy and kept hitting the guy however he wanted, testing out his newly copied fighting techniques on his opponent's body one after another. Even as the guy's face and body became covered in bruises and blood, Mu wasn't satisfied. He finished it off with one final brutal knee strike straight to the guy's already battered face. After putting all his strength into making this an unforgettable day for the bully, Mu finally felt satisfied. He wondered, with a mocking tone in his mind, why the guy wouldn't just admit defeat, but deep down, Mu knew he hadn't given the poor guy even the slightest chance to do so. After finishing with both of them, Mu walked away, knowing he had other things to take care of. Like all his previous opponents, he left his mark on that boxer and added him to his growing list of playthings. The beaten bully, after learning his painful lesson, muttered Lee's name under his breath, calling him a crazy bastard. It wasn't long before Mu returned to Lee's house. Sitting on his bed, he felt great knowing everything was going exactly as he wanted and that he could enjoy fighting almost every day. However, just like before, his weak muscles and fragile bones, which often gave him trouble, were annoying and somewhat concerning. Still, to hold on to this feeling, a mix of fighting opponents stronger than him and experiencing the pain and recovery throughout his body, Mu decided he would do whatever it took. He resolved to return to the God realm first to see what was going on there and to retrieve what he had asked the dragonling to prepare for him. As always, he focused and tried to leave Lee's body and return to his original form. But this time, unlike before when his soul would transfer instantly, several seconds passed and nothing happened. Mu slowly opened his eyes and squinted, glancing around, only to realize he was still in Lee's house. He couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't return to his body in the God realm. The reason for this incident traced back to a few days ago in Lucifer's domain, when he had forcefully thrown Lee onto Elmer's planet without Lucifer's permission. As we already know, that day, Mu had completely ignored Lucifer and had come and gone as he pleased, unaware that his actions were pushing Lucifer to his limits. On his way back to his domain that day, the dragonling had asked Mu about his journey to Earth. Mu explained how much he enjoyed it but also mentioned the weakness of his new body. During that conversation, Mu had ordered his assistant to find a recovery magic orb for him while he was gone, hoping it would help his weak body recover faster on Earth. There was just one small problem: magical items were common on Elmer and a few other planets under Lucifer's control, where they were abundant due to the plentiful mana. In contrast, on Earth, magical items could only be obtained through divine blessings or whims, making them incredibly rare. Because of this, only a handful of people throughout human history had been able to use them, and those who could were often regarded as godlike beings by humans. Not long after Mu arrived at his domain, the dragonling promised to find a recovery magic orb for him the next time he returned to the God realm. When Mu got off the dragon, his assistant reminded him once again about the upcoming gods meeting. That's when Mu casually searched his pants, saying he had prepared something for him due to all the complaints. To the assistant's disbelief, it wasn't anything grand, just a small letter. After delivering his message and fulfilling what he considered his responsibility, Mu approached the miniature Earth model and placed his hand on its surface to return to Lee's body. The dragonling, clearly annoyed, angrily tried to convince him to at least wait and attend the meeting before leaving, but all the complaints fell on deaf ears as Mu completely ignored him, just as before, and transferred his soul back to Earth. Unbeknownst to both of them, a small demon hovered in the sky, silently observing and reporting every move to Mu's greatest enemy. The scene shifted back to the present, where Lucifer was analyzing the situation. He had no idea what Mu was up to, but he was certain his body was now empty of a soul. The fact that Mu hadn't shown up for the meeting made Lucifer realize he wouldn't be in the God realm for a while. That's when it hit him: the time had come to act. This was his once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity to finally get his revenge, and there was no way he was going to miss it. Without any warning, determined to eliminate the one obstacle standing between him and Mu, Lucifer suddenly activated his life taxidermy spell. As the spell took effect, sharp purple lightning bolts shaped like spears appeared above the dragonling. But the dragonling's sharp senses didn't fail him. Not one to be caught off guard, he leaped back just in time, dodging every single spear-like attack in less than the blink of an eye. His previously awkward and ashamed expression quickly shifted to one of seriousness and readiness for battle. With a firm voice, he demanded an explanation. "What's the meaning of this?" he asked sharply, his eyes glowing with intensity as he pressed further for confirmation. "Lucifer, are you seriously declaring war against Mu, the god of Earth?" Now filled with confidence, knowing Mu wasn't around to interfere, Lucifer floated slowly in midair. With a booming voice, he declared that he would personally expel Mu from the seat of divinity. He knew exactly what those words meant and didn't hesitate to confirm it. It was an official declaration of war. The dragonling didn't waste any time. Without hesitation, he compressed his fiery breath and unleashed a deadly blast of flames that resembled a laser shooting straight toward Lucifer. At first, it seemed like Lucifer was caught off guard by the sudden attack, but even without expecting it, he effortlessly dodged it with ease. Strangely, instead of dissipating, the dragon's attack spun around the god's planet-like realm and exploded violently on the far side. The explosion was massive and so intense that the archer god had to quickly conjure a magical shield. He first used it to protect himself and then extended it to shield the other gods attending the meeting. Unlike the others, Lucifer didn't flinch, he didn't move a muscle, not to run, not to shield himself, nothing. The waves and flames from the explosion, reminiscent of a nuclear blast, soon reached the meeting, roaring toward them with unstoppable force. As expected from the gods, neither Lucifer, the dragonling, nor anyone else took any damage. Realizing his first deadly attack had been completely ineffective against Lucifer, the dragonling decided to use his ultimate move, polymorph release. The moment he activated it, his entire body began to transform, not just his arms and legs, but every part of him started expanding. Wild red lightning crackled around him, and a fierce aura surrounded the dragon, making it clear just how serious he was about protecting his master. But even after such a legendary transformation, Lucifer was not the least bit impressed. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The demon god smirked and confidently declared, "I'll deal with you, Mu's little servant, easily. Then it'll be Mu's turn to pay for what he did to me." The dragon, however, had no intention of letting that happen. He was fully committed to defending his master, no matter the cost. But things didn't go as the dragon had planned. Mu's royal assistant was easily defeated by Lucifer, unable to leave even a scratch on him. His entire body was trapped in Lucifer's life taxidermy spell, leaving him immobile and badly injured. The archer god let out a sigh and decided to leave, casually stating that the atmosphere wasn't suitable anymore for a proper godly meeting. Everyone else was left frozen in shock, stunned by the aftermath of the battle between Lucifer and the dragonling. They were too scared to make a move, let alone help either side. The archer god's departure didn't escape Lucifer's notice. Suddenly, Lucifer called out to him and, with a piercing glance, demanded to know whose side he was on, whether he supported the expulsion or opposed it. The archer god, however, just kept floating away casually, responding that he was neutral, neither supporting nor opposing. Lucifer didn't like the answer but made it clear he was fine with it as long as the archer god didn't interfere. Turning to the rest of the gods, Lucifer coldly asked if anyone objected to Mu's expulsion. After witnessing the dragonling's state, someone as powerful as a god utterly defeated, none of them dared to speak up. Meanwhile, the dragonling was still alive and tried to warn Lucifer, reminding him that he was no match for God Mu. But Lucifer just smirked and responded with a chilling revelation. He knew that Mu wasn't here and was instead living in a weak, pathetic human body on Earth. The dragonling was stunned. He hadn't expected Lucifer to know this secret, especially since he thought he was the only one aware of it. In that moment, everything started to click. It all made sense now why Lucifer had suddenly decided to rebel against Mu. However, Lucifer didn't admit that he had learned the secret by spying on God Mu. Instead, he shifted the blame onto the dragon, claiming that his overconfidence in his strength and lack of vigilance had given Lucifer the opportunity to figure it out. The dragonling couldn't stand to hear such disrespectful words. With no other options left, he decided to make one last desperate attempt to stop Lucifer. Using his massive tail, he launched a surprise attack, hoping to catch Lucifer off guard. But once again, things didn't go as planned. Lucifer remained perfectly still, pretending not to notice until the very last second. Then, with precision and ease, he dodged the attack and slashed through the dragon's tail with a magical weapon. Whether it was a spear or a sword didn't matter, Lucifer's power was undeniable. The poor dragon's tail was cut into several pieces. There was a reason Lucifer didn't just finish him off. He knew that as long as Mu's assistant was alive, he could use him to locate Mu on Earth. The thought of confronting Mu in that weak human body and making him suffer for all the humiliations he had endured filled Lucifer with satisfaction. His devilish laughter echoed in the air while the dragonling coughed up blood repeatedly, his body trembling and powerless to stop Lucifer. Later that day on Earth, things weren't looking much better for Hyung. Covered in wounds, he was being harshly scolded by his coach for getting into a street fight. To make matters worse, he was being forced to take a long recovery break right before his important matches. After the lecture, his coach finally dismissed him. As Hyung made his way out of the gym, he couldn't help but mentally blame Lee for the mess he was in. Just as he reached the exit, Kong walked into the gym, leaving the two of them awkwardly face to face. Kong immediately noticed Hyung's beaten appearance and sour mood. Without hesitation, he asked what had happened to him. Feeling embarrassed, Hyung couldn't bring himself to admit that he had been beaten by some random weak-looking guy. Knowing that Kong was one of the best boxers in the country, a sneaky idea popped into his head. He lowered his bruised face, putting on a shameful and sad expression, and started to lie about what had happened. To make it more convincing, he even forced himself to cry, letting tears fall onto the floor as he explained how he had stepped in to help his brother who was being bullied, only to have the bullies gang up on him and beat him mercilessly. He really went all out, crying like a little kid and covering his face to look like an innocent victim just trying to do the right thing. To Hyung's surprise, Kang didn't seem moved at all. He simply ignored the tears and walked past him casually, reminding Hyung that he had no one to blame but himself. Kang told him he needed to be more careful, especially before his competitions, and walked away without another word. Seeing his plan fail and Kang now out of sight, Hyung immediately stopped crying, his face shifting to one of disappointment. But just as he turned to leave, he froze when Kang suddenly called out, "By the way." For a moment, Hyung panicked, thinking Kang had seen right through him and realized the whole thing was a fake act. But to his surprise, it was the complete opposite. Kang actually believed him and was now asking for the name of the person who had done this to him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Mu was still sitting on Lee's dirty bed, unable to stop thinking about why he couldn't return to his original body. His frustration and confusion grew by the second. Based on his divine knowledge and experience, he concluded that there could only be one reason for his inability to return: his body had to be seriously damaged. Even this explanation didn't sit well with Mu. He was convinced that not only was the Dragonling, a being as strong as a god, protecting him, but his godly body wasn't something that could be easily harmed. Shocked, Mu's eyes widened as the realization hit him. He pieced the whole incident together and thought, what if all the gods joined forces to attack me? That seemed to make the most sense. Panicking, he suddenly jumped out of bed. If his theory was correct, he didn't have time to waste, he needed to act fast. But try as he might, he couldn't think of anything to do, which only fueled his anger. Frustrated, he punched Lee's pillow to release some of his built-up rage. The thought that things could spiral out of control if he didn't return to his body made him feel even worse. The idea that those gods, who wouldn't dare face him one-on-one, were now cowardly taking advantage of his situation was unbearable. Unable to contain his fury, Mu started punching the bed and the pillow repeatedly. In his mind, he wished for just one chance to turn the tables and teach all those cowardly gods a lesson. If he got that opportunity, he vowed to make stew out of the lot of them. After a few minutes of venting his frustration, he grew tired and stopped punching. Realizing it was better to calm down and think things through, he reminded himself that the Dragonling, his protector, wasn't someone who would go down easily, even if all the gods teamed up against him. That thought helped him relax a little. He began to consider that if he couldn't do anything about his original body right now, he might as well focus on this one. At least it would give him a better chance of staying alive. With that in mind, he headed back to the training area, this time putting his full effort into strengthening the rest of his body, momentarily ignoring his arm muscles. Training his abdominal muscles for the first time made Mu feel like they were screaming in pain, but oddly enough, that pain made the training more enjoyable for him. As he hung and pulled himself up, the more pain he felt, the louder he laughed. His laughter echoed around the place, and of course, his obnoxious antics annoyed everyone nearby, making them think he was just a crazy, creepy kid. In the midst of his intense training, someone suddenly called his name, startling Mu and causing him to lose focus and fall straight to the ground with a loud thud. The person who had called him was none other than Lee's class president. She looked clearly annoyed, but not because of Mu's loud noises. No, she was upset because Lee hadn't shown up to school for several days. To avoid creating a scene, they decided to have their conversation somewhere calmer. They found a bench in a quiet corner and sat down. Mu casually started the conversation by saying, "Why would I need to go to school? It's not exactly a place where I can train my body." Hearing this, the girl frowned and asked, "Why do you want to train all the time?" Mu shrugged and replied simply, "I train to get stronger, that's it." The class president tilted her head and asked, "And why do you want to get stronger?" Mu grinned and said, "To fight better and take on bigger opponents, of course. My body's too weak right now, and that makes everything harder." From there, Mu launched into an excited rant, rambling on about his reasons for fighting and training. He talked for hours, barely stopping to breathe, leaving the girl with no choice but to sit there and listen to his endless chatter. By the time the sun started to set, she still hadn't managed to convince Mu to come back to school and was running out of ideas. Then suddenly, an idea clicked in her mind. Casually, as if it were no big deal, she said, "What's the point of training so hard if there's no one to fight?" Her words hung in the air, catching Mu completely off guard. To make his point clear, he asked her to look around, pointing out that there was no one there who could challenge him, no matter how strong he got. The girl stood up, preparing to leave, and said, "All you have to do is come to school, meet some people, and start some conflict. Then you'll have plenty of people to fight." With that, she walked off, leaving Mu to think it over. As she left, he couldn't help but feel a little impressed by her reasoning. She had a point. After what he did to those poor bullies, they wouldn't dare come near him again. Without them, he needed to find someone stronger to fight if he wanted to improve and make this body stronger. For the first time, he actually considered going to school. Just as he was mulling it over, a shadowy figure appeared behind him and called out, asking if he was Lee. The figure was wearing a mask to conceal his identity and carrying a weapon. Mu, on the other hand, didn't bother answering the question. He already knew what this was about. His shocked expression shifted to one of relief. Things were going much more smoothly than he had expected. Now he didn't even need to search for his next opponent, as his opponent had come straight to him. With a small smirk, Mu calmly turned his head, preparing himself for the inevitable first strike and the confirmation of battle. There was something about Kong that set him apart from the other bullies Mu had faced years ago, when he was just 15 and starting to excel in boxing. His sister had become a promising rookie ballerina, and as her only family, Kong supported her in every way he could, mentally, emotionally, and in any other way possible. Everything was going well until she caught the attention of a creepy stalker. As the man's obsession grew worse with each passing day, he eventually lost control and crossed a line. He secretly followed her, and when she turned into a quiet alley, he decided to make his move to carry out his sinister intentions. Fortunately, Kong happened to be nearby and saw what was happening. Before the stalker could harm his sister, Kong jumped in and, with a surprise attack, managed to stop him before any damage was done. The police were called, and the stalker was arrested, but because Kong had intervened before anything illegal occurred, there wasn't enough evidence to punish him properly. The man was released not long after, but his obsession had now reached a dangerous peak, turning into madness mixed with a thirst for revenge. Before long, the stalker found the girl again, this time in another secluded spot, but now he had brought a kitchen knife, clearly planning something much more sinister. However, Kong showed up once again, seemingly out of nowhere, and stopped the crime. But this time, he wasn't fast enough. His sister's leg was badly injured, shattering her future as a ballerina like a swan with broken wings. Kong blamed the law for failing to protect her and decided from that day on that he couldn't trust it anymore. Instead, he vowed to do whatever he thought was right. His first act was to beat that creepy man within an inch of his life, but that was just the beginning. Kong resolved to handle what the law couldn't. Whenever he came across a suspicious gang or someone about to bully or harm others for no reason, Kong would step in. He'd give them a warning, not with words, but with a not-so-gentle move. Fate had turned Kong into an anti-bully vigilante. He saw fighting not as violence, but as judgment. Thus, the reason he came after Mu wasn't much different. Back in the present, Mu stood there, accepting Kang's preemptive punch without resistance. Even though he was hit by a surprise attack from behind, a blow that could have easily knocked him out, Mu quickly realized it was just a light punch, nothing like the heavy blows he was used to. As a first strike, he couldn't help but wonder if Kong just wanted to test his reflexes or if the punch was meant as some kind of warning. Either way, Mu didn't care. All he needed was confirmation to start the fight, and now he had it. As usual, Mu felt a thrill about being in another fight, completely unaware that this opponent wouldn't be as easy as the others. Kong, however, didn't rush to officially begin the fight. He hesitated, surprised that Mu wasn't running around beating people up for fun as he had been told. Kong had no idea that it was all a lie made up by Hyung to impress him. Mu, on the other hand, had no interest in explaining himself or clearing up the misunderstanding. He casually ignored Kang's questions and told him to stop wasting time with small talk and just do something already. That hit a nerve with Kong, only reinforcing his belief in Hyung's story and convincing him that Mu really was as crazy as he'd heard. Kong did exactly what Mu asked. He dashed forward and started trying to beat him up without wasting any time. Mu, however, stayed on guard, preparing to defend himself like a professional boxer. Kong didn't hold back, throwing punch after punch, but surprisingly, Mu dodged every single one. With each dodge, Mu's confidence grew bit by bit. Seeing this, Kong quickly realized that his opponent was not just all talk like other bullies, he actually knew a thing or two about fighting. So, Kong decided to step it up a notch and use one of his boxing tricks. He threw a light right punch to block Mu's vision, planning to catch him off guard and land a heavy strike using the opening. But to Kang's surprise, Mu had already anticipated the move and blocked it too. For Kong, though, this was just a warm-up. It felt like he had found the perfect punching bag to practice on. He started throwing punches again, but this time Mu could clearly feel the difference in power compared to the earlier strikes. As expected from a champion boxer, Kong used his skills and experience to maintain relentless pressure, refusing to give Mu even a moment to catch his breath. Punch after punch came at him, powerful and unyielding. Mu found himself completely cornered, unable to do much in response. Kong relentlessly targeted Mu's weak spots, making it nearly impossible for him to focus on the fight. Things worsened when Kong found an opening and landed a bone-crushing punch to Mu's side. The pain hit him instantly. It felt like getting kicked in the groin twice in a row. Kong backed off momentarily, allowing Mu to deal with the sharp pain in his side, but not without making a point. He coldly remarked that he was intentionally going after Mu's weak and injured areas because, in his judgment, unworthy people didn't deserve mercy. Instead of feeling scared, impressed, or even angry, Mu, still grappling with his pain, started laughing. This unexpected reaction threw Kong off for a moment but ultimately irritated him. He couldn't believe Mu's response, which only fueled his fury and made him even more ruthless. Meanwhile, Mu had already recognized the vast gap between Kang's strength and his own. It was painfully clear that this guy was on a completely different level. With Li's body, Mu knew he couldn't match Kong in raw power. However, as someone obsessed with fighting, giving up wasn't an option. Admitting defeat went against his nature. Facing a stronger opponent who didn't fight fair, Mu realized he'd have to adapt and play by the same rules. He just needed to stay focused, sharp, and wait for the right opening. Drawing on thousands of years of battle experience, he recalled a past fight that felt eerily similar to his current situation. It was one of those rare encounters where Mu was nearly overpowered. Even during those painful moments, he never regretted fighting. He always felt a strange satisfaction from the thrill of it. But back then, it wasn't just about enjoying the fight or the pain. Mu wanted to win at all costs, so he forced himself to calm down, momentarily shutting off all his emotions. The creepy grin faded from his bruised face as he began to carefully analyze his opponent's movements. When another punch was about to come straight for his face, Mu made a move. Using his dirty, torn cloak, he distracted Kong just enough to create an opening for himself. The more Mu thought and utilized his tiny bird-sized brain, the smarter and more dangerous he became. In a previous battle, he had managed to capitalize on a similar opening and landed several direct hits on a giant monster he was fighting. To his disappointment, however, those attacks didn't seem to have much effect. That creature was on a whole different level. Despite knowing he was outmatched, Mu didn't stop. He kept using his small brain to find openings while keeping his emotions in check, refusing to give in or give up. He was defeated that day but somehow managed to survive. Even in those agonizing moments, he couldn't help but enjoy the thrill of slipping through the chaos. The situation now wasn't much different, so Mu decided to employ the same strategy, shutting down his emotions and using his brain to try and win. If that didn't work, well, at least he could enjoy getting beaten up. His first move was to shut off his emotions and adopt a sullen expression. However, since he had no idea how Li's face would look after suppressing his feelings, he forced himself to improvise for the time being. This new expression, combined with his already unattractive features, irritated Kong more than ever. It pushed Kong to the peak of his anger, making him think Mu was mocking him on purpose. Determined to finish things with his raw power, Kong charged at Mu. Mu, on the other hand, acted as if he were just fooling around, pretending to be completely unaware of Kang's approach. As Kong moved forward, throwing punches wildly, Mu stepped back, dodging the attacks as best he could. It didn't take long before his back hit a tree, making him realize he needed to change tactics. Suddenly, an idea hit him. He dug his foot into the ground and, with a quick motion, kicked up dirt as fast as he could. Some of it managed to hit Kang's face, but since Kong was wearing protective glasses and quickly shielded his face with his hands, it didn't do much damage. Instead, it only reinforced Kang's suspicion that Mu was a criminal who deserved a beating. All of a sudden, Mu lowered his head, causing Kong to hesitate for a moment, but it was all an act. Mu smirked and taunted him, asking if he had stopped attacking because he was scared. The jab hit its mark, sending Kang's temper skyrocketing and providing him all the motivation he needed to keep going. Without hesitation, Kong launched another attack, but Mu, with his goofy-looking face, was surprisingly ready this time and dodged the punch with ease. Kong wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily, though. With a sudden move, he appeared behind Mu, trying to attack from his blind spot. Once again, Mu managed to dodge, but this time Kang's fist grazed Mu's chin, causing a bit of damage. However, it was nothing Mu cared about. He was convinced his plan was working. Kong couldn't focus like before. It didn't take long for Mu to notice one of the biggest differences between Kong and the other two opponents he had fought earlier. Kang's fighting style was far more aggressive. Unlike their defensive approach, Kang's aggression, fueled by Mu's mocking behavior, made his moves predictable and easier to block with minimal effort. The ground was key to this difference, and that also explained the real purpose behind throwing dirt earlier, not to actually hit Kang's protected face, but to scatter dirt and small rocks, creating obstacles that made it harder for Kong to move freely. Everything was falling into place according to Mu's plan. After struggling to keep up and getting beaten earlier, Mu was now managing to dodge Kang's attacks again. But dodging wasn't his ultimate goal. He was trying to force Kong to move around recklessly, increasing the chances of him stepping on the scattered dirt and small rocks, eventually losing his balance. Soon, Mu got exactly what he was waiting for. Kong stepped on a small rock, lost his focus, and provided Mu with the perfect opening. Wasting no time, Mu jumped into action, knowing he couldn't afford to miss this chance to turn the fight in his favor. He aimed for a vital spot, but midair, he realized his arm wasn't responding, probably from all the strikes he had blocked earlier. Still, he didn't let that stop him and used his elbow instead, landing a heavy blow. For a moment, Mu wondered why his arm had suddenly stopped working and forced him to use his elbow, but it didn't matter much. The elbow strike turned out to be much stronger than any punch he could have thrown. Kang's glasses shattered, leaving him stunned and completely caught off guard. Naturally, Mu couldn't resist seizing the moment to get under Kang's skin again. He started mocking him, throwing insults and making fun of how easily he had been hit. But then things took a turn. So caught up in planning his next move and taunting Kong, Mu failed to notice what was happening in the moment. While Mu was busy with his mocking, Kong had used his weapon to crush Mu's leg. The unbearable pain hit Mu almost immediately, and he dropped to his knees, stunned, unable to believe what had just happened. Standing tall now, Kong rested his weapon on his shoulder, smirking. It was his turn to mock Mu. "What's the matter? Want to laugh and mess around now, or is this not so funny anymore?" Kong had had enough of Mu. No one had ever annoyed him like this before. In his anger, he decided to break Mu's jaw, ensuring he would never laugh again. Mu remained on his knees, unable to move even an inch to dodge or defend himself. Just before the blow landed, he realized something: he had lost. As he closed his eyes, bracing for the hit, his thoughts drifted to the possibility of tasting failure again after nearly 4,000 years. Kong was ready to remind him of that bitter moment, but just a split second before Kang's strike could crush Mu's head, something, a piece of rock, perhaps, came flying out of nowhere and hit Kong directly in the face. The sudden impact made Kong stumble, and the object rolled away into the trees. Whatever it was, it stopped Kang's attack and saved Mu. Now distracted, Kong quickly looked around, trying to figure out who had thrown it. Things escalated further when he heard a faint, weak voice calling out, "Master," and approaching. Kang's instincts kicked in. As someone who took pride in hunting bullies from the shadows, he couldn't risk being seen. Without wasting any time, he grabbed his sweatshirt, threw it on, pulled the hood over his head, and dashed away before anyone could see his face. As soon as Kong disappeared, a small creature that looked like a monster appeared from behind, trembling as it called out, "Master." Mu turned to see who was calling him, and to his surprise, it was a small lizard-like creature with horns. Recognizing it immediately as the creature he had once raised to a dragon and made worthy of being his assistant, Mu was taken aback by how different it looked now. With no one else around to cause trouble, Mu and the dragonling headed back to Li's house. Once they settled in, the dragonling began explaining everything about Mu's current situation in the god's realm and his own story, how he ended up on Earth with this body. According to him, after his defeat against Lucifer, the dark entity had found Mu's godly body and trapped it in an unbreakable, impenetrable barrier that separated time and space. This made it impossible for Mu's soul to return to his body. To ensure no one interfered with his plans, Lucifer took Mu's body to his own domain, where he kept a close watch over it, a satisfied smile always on his face, knowing that without his body, Mu couldn't do much against him. However, there was one small problem: Lucifer couldn't easily enter Earth to finish him off. The only way for him to do so was to convince the dragonling to reveal how he could access or enter Mu's planet. Lucifer also brought the defeated dragon to his domain, promising him that if he cooperated and helped him reach Earth to eliminate Mu, he would make the dragon the new god of Earth in Mu's place. Confident that this offer would tempt Mu's assistant into betrayal for a chance at power, Lucifer awaited a response. However, the dragonling didn't give a clear answer. Instead, he whispered something so quietly that Lucifer couldn't make out what he was saying. Annoyed, Lucifer demanded that he speak louder, at least enough for him to hear. Finally, the dragonling spoke up, but instead of answering directly, he pointed at the barrier surrounding Mu. He asked Lucifer if the barrier, which could block time and space, could also prevent attacks from passing through it. Assuming the dragonling was asking out of concern for Mu, Lucifer confidently assured him that no attack could harm or penetrate the barrier. He even emphasized its invincibility and urged the dragonling to give up and consider joining his side instead. Then something strange happened. Lucifer noticed the surroundings starting to brighten. Suspicious, he turned to see what was happening, and what he saw made him freeze. The dragonling's injured body was glowing with a golden light, crackling with energy. At first, Lucifer was shocked, trying to figure out what the dragonling was planning, but his shock quickly turned to fear when the dragonling suddenly shouted, "Massive self-explosion." In that moment, before Lucifer could react, the roof of his castle, the very place he used as the base to control his domain, was completely shattered. In the next second, his entire castle was obliterated, disappearing as if struck by a nuclear bomb. Yet that wasn't even the craziest part. The explosion was so massive that it burned an entire side of the god's realm to ashes. The dragonling had used 99% of his strength for that explosion, and as a result, he reverted to his smallest, weakest form, a tiny lizard covered in smoke and dust. He did his best to escape before Lucifer realized what had happened. Knowing there was nowhere safe for him anymore, the poor lizard had only one option: to return to his master on Earth. But Lucifer wasn't about to let him escape that easily. Emerging from the dust, furious and feeling betrayed, Lucifer stormed after him, clearly angry enough to turn the lizard into stew for what he saw as an abuse of his kindness. The dragonling sprinted as fast as he could, desperate to stay out of Lucifer's reach. But before he could make it, Lucifer summoned a magical spear and hurled it at him with all his might. The little dragonling, now missing part of his tail, was only a few meters away from Mu's throne and the gateway to Earth. Despite everything, the magical spear missed him, and he managed to leap onto Mu's throne, then onto the miniature Earth surface, vanishing from the godly domain and reappearing in Earth's sky, completely drained of energy. The poor assistant didn't even care where or how he would land. He simply closed his eyes and let fate decide for him. As it turned out, fate had chosen him to be the savior of his master. The object that had hit Kang's face earlier, stopping him from landing the final blow, was none other than this tiny, exhausted lizard. After hearing the dragonling's explanation of everything that had happened, Mu fell deep into thought. His now small assistant couldn't help but wonder if something was wrong, but as expected, Mu wasn't sad. He was furious enough at Lucifer that if he ever got the chance to return to his original body, he wouldn't let Lucifer live another second. Suddenly, Mu's expression shifted from anger to excitement as he realized he finally had a chance to fight Lucifer again, a proper all-out battle. Even his assistant, the little dragonling, was startled by how quickly Mu's attitude and emotions could change. Mu sprang out of Li's bed, buzzing with excitement and finding a renewed purpose to keep going. Deep down, however, he knew he stood no chance against Lucifer in this body. His only option was to work harder and make Li's body stronger. Unfortunately, Li's weak, battered body was in such poor shape that even throwing a light punch in the air felt like everything was breaking. Mu couldn't help but wish this new body could heal faster. Then it hit him. He had told the dragonling to find a magical orb for him the last time they met. Turning to the small lizard, he asked almost hopelessly if there was any chance he had brought it back to Earth. To his surprise, the dragonling claimed he had indeed brought the magical orb, though he didn't have a pocket or bag to carry it. Instead, the little lizard had been hiding the orb deep in his stomach. At Mu's request, he slowly began to cough it up, struggling a bit since the orb was larger than the lizard itself. Once he finally delivered it, the dragonling explained that it was a dragon blood stone infused with a one-time healing spell. The little lizard apologized for only bringing one, saying he had been in a hurry and couldn't carry more. Mu wasted no time waiting for his assistant's saliva to dry. He immediately picked it up to examine it closely. As soon as he held it in his hand, he thanked the dragonling, telling him that this orb would be more than enough for now. Without hesitation, Mu activated the orb, releasing its healing effect, which caused it to shrink in size. Moments later, Mu's body was surrounded by a green aura radiating from the orb, and his wounds began to heal instantly. But that wasn't even the best part. Mu suddenly noticed something surprising. The orb's effect wasn't limited to healing. He could feel his muscles becoming more responsive, almost sensitive in a way they hadn't been before. There was only one explanation: the orb must have also been infused with a body enhancement spell, which was visibly improving Li's weak body. Noticing Mu's impressed reaction, the dragonling proudly admitted that he had personally put effort into it, infusing his own magic into the dragon blood stone. Mu appreciated this as he stared at the leftover remains of the orb, realizing that since it was used on a weak human body, not all of its power had been consumed, which explained the leftover fragment. He handed it to the little lizard, giving him permission to use it for himself. However, the dragonling didn't want to waste it on himself. Instead, he decided to store it for Mu to use later in case of an emergency. Just like before, he carefully pushed it back to its resting place deep inside his stomach. The scene then shifted to a rare yellow lizard on the other side of the city. Surprisingly, it was the favorite pet of the girl from earlier. She didn't see it as just an animal, it was one of her closest friends. She even wished her pet could talk so they would never get bored. Not long after, she stopped playfully teasing her lizard and returned it to its cozy home. She needed to head out, likely to school, and since pets weren't allowed there, she had to leave it behind to live its own life for a while. Peace returned to her home as she attempted to leave, but that day at school was no different. Everything seemed calm and peaceful, no one was bossing others around or causing trouble. Even the beaten-up bully from before was quietly sitting at his desk, now wearing glasses and fully focused on his studies. The pain he endured after facing Mu had knocked some sense into him, and instead of wasting his time, he was now preparing for exams, determined to turn things around. Everything was fine until Mu decided to make one of his usual over-the-top dramatic entrances into the classroom. The moment he walked in, he spotted the beaten-up guy and, without hesitation, asked if he wanted to go for another round of fighting. It wasn't clear if Mu was just messing with him or being completely serious, but before he could get an answer, the president of the student council appeared behind him, acting surprised to see that Lee had actually decided to show up at school after being absent for so long. Mu, with a little lizard crawling under his shirt and causing a slight commotion, casually replied that he was only there because she had convinced him earlier. He added that the only reason he came was to look for someone to fight and beat to a pulp. His intimidating expression and choice of words made the girl wonder what kind of chaos he was planning to stir up this time. However, since there didn't seem to be any immediate signs of trouble, she simply wished him good luck. Half of the day passed without anything exciting happening to make Mu's day interesting. On the floor below his class, two students were chatting about recent events at school. Those two happened to be Kong and a girl from his class. Since he always seemed so clueless about what was going on, the girl was filling Kong in about a second-year student who had recently been humiliated. She explained the details with a bit of gossip flair while Kong listened with mild curiosity, still trying to piece together what had been happening around him. As the school day came to an end, Kong and the girl began walking toward the exit, with her eagerly explaining everything she had heard. According to the rumors, the nerdy guy who used to get bullied all the time had turned the tables on his tormentor one day. He beat the bully so badly that the guy lost consciousness and had to be rushed to the hospital. If that wasn't shocking enough, the nerd had supposedly ripped off the bully's ear in a wild move, earning him the nickname Neutered. At first, Kong had no idea that she was talking about Lee as she described the incident, especially Hyung's appearance and his ripped-off ear, along with Mu's suspicious behavior. But quickly, Kong pieced it all together. There was a high chance that the nerdy guy she was talking about and Lee were the same person. It suddenly hit Kong. Hyung's crocodile tears and his entire act of pretending to be a victim had been a ploy to manipulate him into taking action. However, since it was all in the past and there was nothing he could do about it now, Kong decided to let it go, at least for the time being. On his way back home, Kong didn't realize he was taking the same path as Mu. Meanwhile, Mu was feeling disappointed and frustrated that his day had turned out to be so dull. Everyone at school had been too busy scribbling in their notebooks or on their phones, and there hadn't been a single invitation to fight or even a hint of one. Just as Mu was about to sink further into hopelessness, something caught his eye. It was Kong, awkwardly walking and looking visibly embarrassed as he chatted with a female friend. Since Kong was wearing glasses and a mask to hide his face, Mu didn't recognize him right away. However, something about him felt oddly familiar. His hair color, height, and build seemed similar, but it was the muscle size and form that sparked Mu's suspicion. In just a second, that suspicion turned into certainty. He completely lost control and shouted, "It's that guy from yesterday." His loud voice and sudden outburst caught Kang's attention. Kong turned his head, and the moment he did, he saw Mu charging toward him with a crazed look on his face. Without thinking twice, Kong bolted, running as fast as he could and leaving his shocked friend behind. As Kong sprinted away, he couldn't help but wonder how Mu had recognized him. He was sure that the expensive mask and glasses he had bought were enough to conceal his identity. So why was this lunatic chasing after him? Kong couldn't come up with an answer, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let himself get caught. The last thing he wanted was for this crazy guy to report him to the police or something equally disastrous. Desperate to escape, Kong decided to make an unpredictable move. He spotted an alley up ahead and, without hesitation, veered off his path, jumping straight into it in hopes of losing Mu. Mu kept chasing after him, determined not to let Kong get away so easily. But as he turned into the alley, Kong was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Mu had been looking forward to using this perfect chance to fight Kong, but his hopes were crushed when he realized he was gone. The dragonling popped out of Mu's shirt, asking if that was the same guy who had dared to challenge his lord yesterday. Wanting to help his god track down the rude human, the little lizard requested permission to sniff him out using the strong male scent he had picked up when Kong hit him the day before. Mu gave him the green light, and the dragonling immediately sprang into action, sniffing around like a well-trained puppy. Just as Mu's assistant was fully committing to his new role, someone suddenly appeared right in front of him, stopping him in his tracks. Luckily avoiding being stomped on, the little lizard tilted his head up to see who it was. To his surprise, it wasn't Kong at all, but the president of Lee's class. She stood there, stunned, staring at him with wide eyes. Her shock didn't last long, though. It quickly shifted to a delighted blush as she looked at the adorable little lizard. Clearly, it was her first time seeing something so cute, and she couldn't help but be intrigued. The dragonling had no idea who this girl was, completely unaware that, unlike other humans, she loved lizards more than anything else, forgetting for a moment that he was a demigod and wasn't supposed to be seen by humans. He casually told the girl to step aside so he could finish his task, but things didn't go as expected. The girl completely ignored him and fearlessly scooped up the little lizard in her hands as if he were a stuffed toy. The dragonling was totally caught off guard and struggled to wriggle free from her grip. Frustrated and feeling helpless, he snapped at her, giving an angry warning that he wasn't someone she could just mess with or be rude to. For a brief moment, he wished he had even a tiny bit of his magic left to launch a spell and escape. While the dragonling saw this girl as a nuisance, perhaps even an enemy, the girl didn't feel the same way. In fact, she found him absolutely fascinating. Despite his strange and unique appearance, she couldn't believe she was holding a talking lizard. To her, he was the cutest, most adorable thing she had ever seen, so much so that she instantly liked him even more than her own beloved pet, the one she had always cherished above everything else. Suddenly, the dragonling spotted an opening and bolted, freeing himself and darting behind Mu for safety. Hiding behind Lee's body, he quickly apologized to Mu for failing because of the girl, blaming it on the fact that he had lost all his power. Before Mu could respond, the girl approached him with a serious expression, one that looked downright terrifying to the little lizard. She asked if, by any chance, that tiny creature was his friend. Mu glanced at his visibly shaken assistant and confirmed, "Friend? Not sure about that, but yes, that little one is my obedient assistant." The girl then introduced herself as Kim Yujin, though it was obvious she was a bit jealous that Mu had such an obedient, talking, and let's be real, adorable lizard. Mu could easily read her expression, and although he wasn't entirely sure why she looked so stunned and envious, an idea popped into his head. With a sudden and unexpected move, Mu shifted the leg the dragonling was clinging to closer to the girl and said, "If you want, I could lend him to you for a bit in exchange for a little information." The poor dragonling's opinion didn't matter to Mu in the slightest, and Kim lit up at the offer. She would obviously do anything to hold the lizard for a while. Giving up some information was the smallest price to pay. Without waiting for her to respond, Mu reached down, grabbed the dragonling by the neck, and handed him over to her. "Take him, you can keep him as long as you like, but there's someone you have to help me find." Kim was so mesmerized by the lizard that she didn't hesitate to agree, not even pausing to ask if they were tracking down a criminal, a good person, or something else entirely. That was exactly what Mu wanted to see. Without a second thought, and as if he didn't care about his assistant at all, he casually tossed the little lizard toward her. To Kim's surprise, the poor thing spun midair and landed right on top of her head. The dragonling couldn't help but wonder how his lord could abandon him so easily, as if he were nothing. Meanwhile, Mu didn't waste a moment. He started walking off, telling the dragonling to stay with Kim Yujin for a while and return on his own later. Still in shock, the dragonling tried to ask where his master was planning to go without him, but Mu just ignored him completely, acting as if he had suddenly found something exciting to do after what had been a dull day. Not long after, Kim and the dragonling arrived at her house, and things were a bit awkward. Kim couldn't help but wonder if the lizard was mad at her for being dragged along against his will. Truthfully, he wasn't thrilled about the situation, but since he couldn't defy his lord's orders, he sighed and introduced himself. After a moment, he stretched out his tiny hand and, trying to keep things professional, explained the situation to Kim. "As per my master's instructions," he said, "you'll be actively cooperating with me from now on." Kim was momentarily taken aback at the sight of a tiny lizard trying to boss her around. However, the way he acted and the fact that she could say or do whatever she wanted with him made her heart skip a beat for a second. Still, she didn't want to come off as rude, so she placed her fingers on the dragonling's tiny hand and gave it a little shake to show respect. As she did, she asked, "By your master, do you mean Li Ho?" The dragonling didn't respond, but his silence seemed to confirm her guess. Taking that as her answer, Kim nodded and said she was willing to cooperate with him if that was what he wanted. Then, with a proud grin, she announced, "By the way, I'm the president of my class." The dragonling blinked, completely confused. "What's a president?" he asked, tilting his little head. Seeing his puzzled reaction, Kim chuckled and explained, "It means I'm like the leader of my class, and besides that, I'm also ranked first in my grade." Hearing this, the dragonling's eyes widened in realization. "Ah, so that's why my master chose this girl, because she's an important person." But as this thought settled in, another realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. If this girl was the leader of her class, that meant his lord wasn't. Unable to hold back his curiosity, the dragonling asked, "Wait, does that mean Lord Li Ho isn't the leader of your class?" Kim paused for a moment, her expression shifting as she got lost in thought. After a few seconds, she finally replied, "Li? He's not even an average student in our class. Honestly, he's one of the lowest in everything." The dragonling froze, utterly stunned by her answer. For a moment, he just stood there, trying to process this shocking information. The moment Mu's assistant realized what she had said, he shouted in disbelief, thinking Kim was talking about Mu himself. The idea seemed completely impossible to him. To clarify what he assumed was a misunderstanding, the tiny lizard, now sweating with discomfort and frustration, firmly declared that his master was the strongest being in the entire world, stronger than any god. Acting as if he were still in his terrifying dragon form, he began to boss Kim around again. He demanded that she do her absolute best to help his master become even stronger so he could finally get his revenge. Kim, on the other hand, was impressed by what she assumed was the little lizard's wild imagination and sweet talk about Li. Amused, she agreed to help, but only on one condition: the dragonling should agree to visit her often if he wanted her assistance. The dragonling paused for a moment, considering her condition. In truth, he had already planned to use Kim as a human source to gather information about what was happening on Earth. Now, her condition was the perfect excuse to visit her more often and get the intel he needed. Without hesitation, he agreed to her terms, and the two of them struck a deal. As the most loyal servant who had sacrificed his life countless times for his lord, the dragonling was determined to do whatever it took to help his master reclaim the title of the strongest. Deep in his heart, he believed every move he made would bring his master closer to his rightful place at the top. Meanwhile, Mu, who was also focused on getting stronger, was busy with some intense, borderline crazy training using his newly strengthened body. Unlike before, when he struggled with even the simplest exercises, now he could handle everything with ease, as if it were no big deal. As the sun began to set, Mu decided he had done enough for the day. Jumping down from where he had been training, he glanced at his body, visibly satisfied with his newfound strength. Not only had he recovered much faster than he had hoped, but his physical strength had almost doubled. Like always, it felt almost habitual. He decided to show his excitement by swinging a punch, but this time, instead of throwing a random punch into the air, he confidently aimed at a nearby iron rod. The results were better than he could have imagined. Not only did he not break any bones, but for the first time, he didn't even feel pain in his hand. For a moment, he was thrilled with himself, but then his happy expression quickly faded into disappointment as he remembered why he had come out here in the first place. He had hoped to see Kong while squeezing in some training, but now that the sun was almost gone, Mu figured it was better to head back. He realized there might be a better chance of running into Kong at school in the next few days anyway. With that thought in mind, he decided to call it a day and leave. Mu departed from the training spot, leaving behind a mark that would serve as a reminder. As he walked through the streets, the disgusting smell of his sweat clung to the air around him. Luckily, no one was nearby to catch a whiff of the unpleasant stench. However, as Mu unintentionally reached Kim's neighborhood, his sweaty scent had gotten so strong that it seeped through the air, hitting the dragonling's sharp senses. The tiny lizard, busy using Kim and her PC to gather information, froze the moment the smell hit him. As expected from a dragon with keen senses, he recognized it instantly. Without wasting a second, the dragonling jumped down and left the girl behind to enjoy her peace and quiet. "Thanks a lot," he called out, waving as he dashed off, now acting more like an excited puppy than a dragon. The dragonling followed the scent trail, leaping from rooftops to walls in search of his master. It didn't take long for his keen nose to lead him straight to Mu. With one final leap, he dashed to the edge of a building and jumped right onto Mu's shoulder, landing perfectly in place. Mu was a little surprised to see him. The dragonling greeted him and proudly announced that he had completed what he thought was his mission. Neither of them realized that in a nearby alley, someone was being beaten up. The dragonling was thrilled to have found a loyal assistant for himself, one who promised loyalty to Mu too. However, his excitement distracted Mu, causing him to miss what was happening nearby as they walked past. After taking a few steps, the dragonling's sharp nose picked up a familiar scent. It belonged to the guy he had been chasing earlier. The little lizard was right, it was Kong, acting like Batman and beating someone up in the shadows. But this time, the guy getting beaten wasn't just some bully or thug, he had stolen a bicycle. Instead of apologizing, the thief started threatening Kong, saying he'd send someone after him if Kong didn't let him go right away. As expected, this only confirmed for Kong that he had picked the right target, so he doubled down. Kong was so focused on dealing with the thief that he didn't realize Mu had appeared behind him, looking thrilled to have found him again. But that didn't last long. Kong quickly sensed danger behind him and turned to see who was secretly watching. As soon as he spun around, he realized it was the same weird boy from the other day, the one who, despite admitting defeat, just wouldn't leave him alone. Everything felt tense, except for the little dragonling, who was facing the other way and clinging to Mu, insisting they were going the wrong way. The dragonling kept pointing in another direction, urging them to head that way. As usual, Mu ignored his loyal companion and focused entirely on the person he had been searching for. Both of them locked eyes, Mu looking determined and Kong unsure of what to do. Mu began moving, taking slow, deliberate steps forward. Kong, on the other hand, tried to explain that there had been some kind of misunderstanding and that Mu shouldn't attack him like this. But Mu didn't care, he was unconcerned about the little lizard on his shoulder or what Kong was trying to say. Suddenly, he quickened his pace, making it clear he was ready to strike. Kong still showed no intention of fighting back, at least not until the very last moment. That's when he realized that if he didn't defend himself, things could go really badly for him. He quickly took a defensive stance, bracing himself to face Mu head-on. Kong had defeated Mu in the past, but this time, his hesitation stemmed from the realization that Mu wasn't the kind of person who deserved to be beaten, contrary to his earlier thoughts. Mu, however, couldn't care less about Kang's feelings. With his fully recovered and stronger body, he felt confident and ready to face him again. Their clash seemed inevitable. Mu was determined to attack, and Kong was equally determined to defend himself. But surprisingly, nothing happened. Both of them froze in place, staring at each other without making a move. Mu had been pretending to attack, hoping to provoke Kong into making the first move so he'd have a reason to officially start the fight, but Kong didn't take the bait. The boxer watching from the sidelines was shocked to see the wild-looking guy who had been chasing Kong suddenly stop, showing no intention of fighting in the middle of their standoff. While Kong was fully focused on Mu, the thief seized the opportunity. With a swift move, he snatched Kang's weapon. Now armed and with a solid excuse to fight, the thief was ready to make Kong regret ever defeating him so mercilessly. He swung the weapon at Kong, shouting in anger and aiming to seriously injure or even kill him. But Kong was faster than he expected. With a quick movement of his legs and a sharp turn of his head, Kong stepped out of the weapon's path just in time. As he dodged the attack, he realized that Mu was now directly in line to take the hit. Instead of feeling relieved that the persistent creep would get hurt, Kong felt a pang of worry for Mu's safety. But it was too late, he couldn't do anything to stop it now. Mu, on the other hand, had been watching the attack closely from start to finish. He could have easily dodged or blocked it, but he didn't. After absorbing that magical orb, Mu had been itching for a fight. If Kong wasn't willing to face him, then who better to fight than this guy? The preemptive strike landed hard on Mu's head. Strangely, though, what could have easily knocked someone unconscious or even killed them left nothing more than a small scratch. That was all the confirmation Mu needed. With an excuse to start a fight now, he wasted no time and retaliated immediately, delivering a powerful kick to the thief's stomach. The force of the blow caused the thief to lose control of Kang's weapon, unintentionally tossing it into the air. The weapon spun for a moment before Mu caught it just as it was about to hit the ground. Without wasting a second, he swung it behind the beaten thief's neck and yanked the man toward him in one swift motion. As soon as the thief was close enough, Mu struck him directly in the face with a brutal headbutt. Mu seemed to revel in the sight of the thief on the verge of passing out from the pain. The man clutched his head with one hand, desperately trying to ease the agony, thinking Mu was finished after that strike. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Mu wasn't about to let this guy off the hook without delivering a proper beating. Like a punching bag, the thief endured hit after hit as Mu landed punches wherever and however he pleased. Sometimes, he even used Kang's weapon to make the punishment feel more satisfying. The relentless blows continued until the thief could no longer handle it. He collapsed to the ground, shaking from the unbearable pain, tears streaming down his face as he cried like a helpless child. Mu stood over him, feeling satisfied that he had taught this guy a lesson: never dare to attack anyone else again. However, that smug smile on his face quickly faded as he realized he didn't enjoy one-sided, boring fights like this. It wasn't fun or even a little challenging for him. Mu thought back to how he felt when he first arrived on Earth and fought Lee's bully or even that other guy, Hyung. Those battles were far better and much more interesting than this one. He made up his mind, the only person worthy of being his opponent right now was Kong, no one else. Just then, he remembered that he had come here solely to face Kong in the first place, not to deal with this ugly guy. He quickly turned to see where Kong was, but to his surprise, Kong had completely disappeared. It seemed that Kong had taken the opportunity to make a run for it while Mu was busy with the thief, eager to finish his anti-bullying mission. As Kong hurried away quickly and quietly, he couldn't help but wonder how Mu kept finding him no matter where he went. Little did Kong know that the crazy-looking guy who seemed to enjoy fighting so much was actually a god. Caught up in his escape and trying to shake Mu's excited face from his mind, Kong failed to notice the dragonling. The little lizard looked completely distracted, obsessed with something on the other side of the street. As Kong rushed past, he accidentally kicked the dragonling right in the rear, sending the poor creature flying forward. In such a hurry, Kong didn't even stop to check what or who he had just kicked out of his way. A little while later, Kong arrived home. He stepped inside, casually kicked off his shoes, and sent them flying across the room without bothering to use his hands. His mind was completely consumed with thoughts of Mu and that freaky, pumped-up face of his, always ready to fight anyone. Just then, his sister, who had been outside, walked in teasingly, shouting, "The prosecutor has arrived." Kang's 26-year-old sister, Hina, had decided to switch careers after that stalker case and become a prosecutor with the goal of bringing justice to cruel criminals. Kong and Hina shared the same purpose, but it seemed they had chosen very different paths to achieve it. With a playful shove, Hina pushed past Kong, grinning as she mocked him, saying, "How dare you block the path of a great prosecutor?" Clearly annoyed, like any other brother would be, Kong warned her about the consequences of making him use his powers. With that, everything settled down, and Hina headed to her room to change her clothes, but not before calling out to Kong, asking him to make ramen for both of them since there was nothing else to eat. As Kong stood there, he couldn't help but think about that wild day when his sister got injured. The way she was acting now, so lively and full of energy, made Kong wonder if she had truly moved on from that incident or if she was just pretending. It was something he couldn't figure out for himself, forgetting that day wasn't an option. The next day, while everyone else was peacefully heading to school, Mu was doing the same. However, instead of carrying a backpack or even a single book, he was only holding Kang's weapon, along with the dragonling perched on his shoulder. The poor little creature looked beaten and exhausted, muttering apologies for his failure the night before. As usual, Mu didn't pay much attention to what the dragonling was saying. Some students walking nearby, including Lee's bully, couldn't help but stare at the little dragonling, wondering if it was a Kodo dragon. But none of them dared to get close enough to find out. That's when something caught Mu's attention. It was Kim Yujin, the class president. As soon as she spotted her beloved talking lizard, her face lit up with excitement. She started jumping up and down, clearly thrilled to see her friend again. However, her happiness was short-lived as Mu quickly reminded her that it was time for her to help him with the favor he had asked for. That's when Kim remembered the deal she had made when she agreed to borrow the talking lizard. Mu himself didn't have much information to go on. He only knew that the person he was looking for wore some kind of mask and protective glasses. But that was enough for Kim to instantly realize who he was talking about. She told Mu that she had heard stories about a bully hunter, someone infamous for immediately pummeling anyone who acted like a bully. Unfortunately, Kim didn't have any detailed information about Kong beyond those common rumors, which left Mu feeling a bit disappointed. Still, he was confident they'd cross paths again soon, and next time he swore he wouldn't let Kong escape so easily. What Mu didn't realize, however, was that Kong, the very person he was thinking about, was already there, secretly approaching and observing him from behind. Kong didn't stop there. He leaned in closer, and to Mu and the dragonling's horror, whispered, "Stay in your seat after class. I'll come find you." With that, Kong withdrew his weapon, casually walked past Mu, and continued on his way. Mu hadn't expected to face Kong so soon. It was so sudden that just hearing Kang's voice sent shivers down his spine. Still, despite all his planning to confront Kong, Mu let him go without complaint. Watching how Kong and Lee interacted, Kim couldn't help but wonder if they were friends or if there was something between them that she didn't know about. Gathering her courage, she asked Lee, "Who's that guy, anyway?" Meanwhile, as Mu stood there anticipating his encounter with Kong after class, he watched how Kong got away with just one word in response to Kim Yujin's question, "Bully hunter." From that moment until the end of class, Mu's hopeful and excited expression didn't fade. The idea of finally facing someone worthy of his time made him feel both nervous and excited. To calm himself, Mu kept repeating that he could wait as long as it took if it meant having a real fight. But it was all just an act. His eager face masked the chaotic thoughts in his mind. In reality, he was on edge, so nervous that his right leg wouldn't stop shaking, a clear sign that despite his outward confidence, he was struggling to maintain control. At the same time, the situation couldn't have been worse for the dragonling, who had chosen that very leg to hide under Mu's pant leg and rest during class. Now, he had been dealing with what felt like an endless earthquake since the morning. Finally, the long school day for both the dragonling and his master came to an end. The students, except for the night study group, were free to leave. Without wasting a moment, Mu quickly found the class president, Kim Yujin, and handed over his little assistant, who was clearly feeling nauseous. He told her he had something urgent to take care of. Without hesitation, Kim eagerly accepted the dragonling, almost as if it was the best thing that could have happened to her. She picked up the little lizard and started walking toward the exit, blissfully unaware that if she squeezed him a bit too hard, she'd have to deal with him throwing up right then and there. Without asking any questions or doing anything else, she happily left the classroom. As soon as she was gone, leaving only Mu behind, a hand suddenly appeared from the other side of the room. Of course, it was Kong, who jumped out to make his presence known. The long-awaited moment had finally arrived for Mu, and he realized the time for the fight had come. Kong didn't waste any time. He stepped into the classroom, shut the door behind him, and reached into the depths of his backpack. With a calm yet deliberate motion, he pulled out his training gloves and slipped them on. Mu was a little surprised, wondering if Kong was planning to do the same thing he had done before, using his belt to wrap around his hand for protection and better performance. As Kong put on his second glove, he looked at Mu with a curious expression and asked if he actually loved fighting. Mu's response wasn't what Kong expected. He shook his head and outright rejected the idea, saying he didn't fight because he loved it. Before they could continue their conversation, what Mu truly loved flashed through his mind. First and foremost was the pain and shock he felt when he got hit. For most people, that would be the last thing they'd want to experience. But for Mu, enduring that kind of pain after thousands of years made those moments oddly satisfying. Second was the burning sensation in his muscles, screaming at him after being pushed beyond their limits. Third, for over 3 million years, fighting and battling had been the only thing that made him feel truly alive. With that mindset, Mu believed he didn't fight because he liked it, he fought because it was a necessity for him, a part of his existence. Yet, as he thought about it, his face twisted into a creepy, overly excited expression that made Kong pause. In that moment, Kong couldn't help but think that this guy was completely insane, maybe even a psycho or something worse. Not wanting to overthink Mu's strange behavior, Kong unzipped his backpack again, pulled out another pair of training gloves, and tossed them to him. He acted like he was there for a friendly sparring match, not a fight to the death. Mu let the gloves hit him square in the face on purpose, not even blinking at the impact, but still managed to catch them midair before they fell. Kong calmly placed his backpack in the corner and, with a serious expression, told Mu to put the gloves on. He explained that he wanted to keep things fair, mentioning that he couldn't take a fight seriously unless his opponent looked like more than just some random thug. In an instant, Mu slipped on the gloves and dashed toward Kong, clearly excited to put his new gift to good use. He threw the first punch, and as expected, Kong blocked and dodged it simultaneously. Kong looked slightly annoyed by how hasty Mu was, not even giving him a chance to say what he wanted to say. But he quickly calmed himself down, reminding himself that he had come here for a fight, and this was it, no point in getting upset. After exchanging a series of random punches and blocks, both fighters stepped back for a brief moment. That short pause was all Kong needed to assess the situation and refocus. Drawing on his experience as a pro boxer, he reminded himself that the first thing he needed to do was relax his body and avoid letting his muscles stiffen up. This wasn't just about brute strength, it was about control. Kong took his first step, and that was all the opening Mu needed to charge in again recklessly, going for another attack. But unlike last time, Kong was more than ready. Not only did he defend himself without taking any damage, but he also turned the tables and landed a heavy punch right on Mu's jaw. If that wasn't enough, he used the new opening to follow up with another strike, this time hitting Mu on the opposite side of his face and even harder than the first punch. As Kong looked at his hand, he couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The power and precision behind his punches amazed him. He was so impressed with himself that he began reviewing, or maybe even replaying, the motion on Mu, almost as if testing it out again to see how it worked. First, he loosened up his muscles, then let the rotational force of his body flow through his fist and fingers, transmitting all that power straight into his opponent's body. Now it was Kong who looked genuinely excited, eager to teach Mu some painful yet practical boxing lessons. Meanwhile, Mu couldn't deny he was impressed by Kang's skill. He realized that if it weren't for the body enhancements he'd received from that mysterious orb, those punches could have done some serious damage. But instead of feeling discouraged, Mu felt even more exhilarated. This was exactly what he'd been craving, a fight that was both challenging and painful. With that thought driving him, he couldn't help but press on, determined to continue what he believed was a proper fight. On the third floor, a red-haired guy was dozing off during the night self-study class. Out of nowhere, his body started trembling uncontrollably, as if he were having a nightmare about seeing a ghost. He jolted awake, looking completely disoriented, as if he had no idea where he was. Once he snapped back to reality, he noticed a not-so-friendly note on his desk, calling him out for always sleeping during class. Without bothering to figure out who left the note, he glanced at the clock on his phone and decided it was time to leave. He grabbed his backpack, stood up from his seat, and a few moments later found himself on the stairs heading down to exit the school. Feeling a bit hungry, the scruffy-looking guy pulled out a snack from seemingly nowhere and started eating. As he reached the second floor, something unusual caught his attention, a shadow moving up and down in the second-year classroom at this hour. It was clearly someone, or maybe two people, but he couldn't tell who they were. That shadow, of course, belonged to Mu and Kong, who were still locked in their fierce fight. At that moment, Mu found himself cornered with no choice but to defend himself. Thinking quickly, he lifted his foot into the air and, in a sudden and unexpected move, planted it firmly on Kang's chest, stopping and surprising him. But that wasn't all. As Kong staggered slightly, caught off guard, Mu aimed to follow up with a kick to his face. Kong managed to protect his face, but it was clear he was furious. He glared at Mu and demanded to know why he had suddenly started using his legs when kicks were forbidden in boxing. Mu, now confident with his newfound strategy, smirked and replied, "What are you talking about? I don't even know what boxing is." Before Kong could respond, Mu leapt toward him, aiming another kick while taunting, "Who said we were only using fists in this fight, huh?" His kick landed hard, pushing Kong backward for a few moments. Kong was visibly struggling, and a part of him even started to believe Mu's words. However, as a trained boxer, he was completely unprepared to deal with kicks. Before Kong could regain his focus, Mu took advantage of his confusion and landed another solid kick. The once dominant boxer now found himself cornered and unable to do anything but defend himself. Kong couldn't help but wonder how someone who looked so weak could deliver such powerful kicks to his upper body. To Kang's shock, Mu suddenly switched tactics and aimed a kick at a vital point in his lower body. Kong froze, completely unsure of how to respond. One thing was certain: if that spot got hit, it would be over for him, and he would collapse, unable to continue the fight. Just as he feared, Mu struck the weak spot effortlessly, but to both their surprise, nothing happened. Kong didn't even feel a hint of pain. Mu immediately retreated, putting distance between them while wearing a smug, knowing smile, as if he had held back on purpose and deliberately avoided finishing Kong off. In truth, Mu had used his full strength in that attack, but the physical enhancement from the Dragonling's power had worn off as if it had never existed. Realizing this, Mu started to panic. He knew that without the enhancement, he was no match for Kong. Meanwhile, Kong, still a little surprised, noticed something was off. He knew Mu wasn't the type to show mercy to anyone, yet he still had no idea why Mu hadn't gone for the finishing blow. Then, as if struck by divine insight, Kong smirked and mockingly said, "Don't tell me you suddenly lost your power." Kong had no clue that his random, ridiculous guess about Mu was actually spot on. To him, the only explanation was that Mu was simply exhausted and worn out. He had no idea about the orb or the Dragonling's buff. Mu, on the other hand, said nothing and continued to pretend everything was fine, as if Kong were completely off base. But that didn't change Kang's mind. He had already pieced together the situation in his head, which was enough to make him burst out laughing. After their intense fight, Mu looked like he had no idea how to keep going in this chaotic battle. Meanwhile, the red-haired guy standing behind the classroom door was watching them. The sight of two awkward-looking people trying to fight each other while laughing like it was some comedy show wasn't exactly entertaining for him. In fact, it was so annoying that he decided to leave rather than waste any more time on their silly fight. It wasn't clear if this scruffy-looking guy was strong or skilled, but for some reason, watching Kong and Mu's battle left him feeling grossed out. Just as the red-haired guy walked off, Kong finally stopped laughing. His face turned serious as he charged at Mu, knowing this was the perfect moment to take advantage of the situation. Mu, on the other hand, found himself in a tough spot, trying to use his leg to block Kang's attack or at least make it harder for him to land a punch. However, that simple plan wasn't enough to stop Kong. Instead of aiming for Mu's face, Kong went straight for a vital spot that Mu had unknowingly left wide open. Mu thought his knee would serve as a solid defense, but things didn't go as expected. With just one strike, he felt a sharp pain, and being on one leg caused him to spin around almost 90 degrees, creating a perfect opening for Kong. Kong didn't waste any time, he delivered a bone-crushing punch right to Mu's head. The hit was so powerful that it sent Mu flying several meters backward. Even that wasn't enough to knock him out, though. Mu slumped against the wall behind him, realizing that without the enhancement buff, there was no way he could stand up to Kang's solid muscular body. A desperate solution crossed his mind: if he could just use a small amount of his original mana or inner energy, he could easily overpower this opponent. However, having already tried and failed to use his mana several times, that idea didn't seem very reliable right now. Still, Mu decided to take a chance, as even the smallest shot at doing the impossible was better than nothing. He pushed himself up to his feet, gathered his courage, and focused as hard as he could to summon even a tiny bit of magic into his fist before attacking. Putting all his trust in that slim hope, he confidently launched himself at Kong, now relying on his non-existent magic. But Kong, treating it like nothing more than a child's punch, easily caught Mu's fist midair before it could land. Seeing an opportunity to mock Mu again, Kong teased him with a smug grin that, while lively, still lacked any real excitement or effort. Then, out of nowhere, Kong suddenly felt something strange, like energy or a weird sensation passing through his body. It caught him so off guard that he instinctively turned his head to look behind him, trying to figure out what it was. That momentary distraction was all Mu needed. He didn't hesitate for a second and took full advantage of Kang's lowered guard, throwing another punch straight at his face. This time, Mu's punch wasn't as strong as it would have been with the enhancement buff, but for some reason, it hit Kong harder than expected, enough to make him feel a little dizzy and snap him back to reality, refocusing all his attention on his opponent. After that punch, Kong managed to grab Mu's other hand, but once again, he felt a stronger wave of energy passing through his body and moving toward his back. Instinctively, he turned to see what it was that had just passed through him. Whether it was magic from Mu or just some strange sensation didn't really matter. What did matter was that Mu used this moment to take advantage again. This time, he relied on the most dependable weapon in his arsenal, his head. Mu's headbutt struck hard, sending Kong stumbling backward, crashing into the classroom door and collapsing completely knocked out. Mu stood tall and proud in front of him, wondering if his plan to use mana in his attacks had actually worked or if it had all been his imagination. After a moment, he realized that he had somehow managed to channel a small amount of magic into his fist by redirecting a bit of mana into his body using a new method he'd never tried before. Yet, honestly, the thrill of being able to use magic wasn't nearly as exciting as the thought of what he wanted to do next. Now looking like a caveman who hadn't eaten in a year and had just found a feast, was unaware as Mu approached his unconscious face. Mu wasn't planning anything too crazy, he was just eager to leave his mark on him in his own way. However, at the very last moment, fate intervened and somehow woke Kong up, allowing him to save his ear for another day. As soon as Kong came to his senses, he realized Mu was about to mark him like his other unfortunate victims. But that wasn't something Kong, a champion boxer, was going to let happen easily. He quickly shoved Mu away and got to his feet, still feeling dizzy but determined to stop him. Kong immediately admitted that he had underestimated Mu and accepted his loss, but he wasn't going to let Mu rip his ear off. He wanted to say something, probably about the strange sensation he'd felt earlier before getting knocked out, but the pounding pain in his nose and his spinning head made it impossible to form a coherent thought. So instead of explaining, he made a quick excuse and decided to leave, thinking it was best to get as far away from Mu as quickly as possible. Watching Kong walk away, Mu couldn't help but feel disappointed. He had really looked forward to adding Kong to his list of playthings, but it was clearly not going to happen today. Meanwhile, at Kim Yujin's house, the little dragonling struggled under the weight of a bag that looked to be twice his size. It was so heavy that he was already sweating before he even started moving. Apparently, the bag was full of items that either he or his master had asked him to buy. With no other choice, the dragonling braced himself and headed back, choosing the hard way, leaping down from rooftops instead of sticking to the safer paths. As he started running toward Li's house, the little dragonling suddenly spotted Kong in the distance, looking dizzy and holding his injured face. The moment he saw him, the dragonling immediately recognized Kong as the same guy who had kicked him in the butt the other day for absolutely no reason. There was no way he was letting this chance for revenge slip away. He quickly dropped his bag on the ground and crouched into a ready-to-jump stance on top of it. Then, like a bullet, he launched himself toward Kong, aiming to headbutt him square in the face, just like his master had done earlier. But luck wasn't on his side. Despite his dizzy state, Kong spotted the dragonling at the last second and instinctively threw a punch, smacking the poor lizard midair. For a moment, Kong was freaked out, dazed, and confused, not even recognizing the dragonling. He was left wondering what kind of weird animal had just attacked him. So out of it, he couldn't even process what was happening. Kong considered giving the dragonling a proper beating for scaring him, but in his current condition, that just wasn't an option. Instead, he shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and continued on his way, desperate to get home and rest. As soon as Kong disappeared, someone else arrived at the scene, standing over the dragonling's crumpled body. Of course, it was none other than Mu. He stared down at the dragonling, beaten and sprawled out on the ground, wondering if the little guy was dead or still alive, and more importantly, what was inside the bag lying next to him. The next morning, Mu was walking through the streets on his way to school again, but this time with one noticeable difference: he was wearing a brand new school uniform and carrying the dragonling in his new backpack. The dragonling seemed perfectly content being carried this way. It was definitely more comfortable and secure than sitting on Mu's shoulder or hiding under his clothes. Just then, the dragonling proudly mentioned that Kim Yujin, his royal and ever-reliable assistant, was the one who bought the uniform and backpack for Mu, solely to satisfy him. The dragonling seemed to like his new home and declared he wouldn't come out, wanting to stay hidden and avoid drawing any unnecessary attention for the time being. Meanwhile, Kong was walking down the other side of the street when he spotted Mu. Without hesitation, he crossed over to greet him and, with a curious look, asked why Mu was wearing a school uniform on a Saturday. To Kang's surprise, Mu simply replied, "What Saturday?" Kong felt a little disappointed, or maybe even annoyed, thinking Mu was trying to mess with him so early in the morning. He decided not to argue about it, though, and instead attempted to bring up what he had wanted to tell Mu the day before but hadn't been able to. Kong asked Mu again if he actually liked fighting, and once more, Mu gave the same answer, saying he fights because he has to. It was hard for Kong to believe that, especially after seeing the excitement on Mu's face during their battle yesterday. However, Kong didn't complain about it and instead got straight to the point. He requested Mu to hang out with him from now on, adding that if Mu agreed, he wouldn't feel bored anymore because he wouldn't have to keep looking for fights. As soon as Mu heard that, his whole body started trembling with excitement, and that scary yet thrilled smile lit up his face again. Kong didn't need any words to understand Mu's answer, it was written all over him. It wasn't easy for anyone to change Mu's opinion about someone, but somehow, Kong had managed to do it. Suddenly, Mu felt like Kong might actually be a good person. Everything seemed to be going well for both of them until Mu suddenly blurted out, "Take me somewhere I can fight right now." Kong froze for a second before explaining that he didn't mean they were going to fight immediately, he was talking about some other time. Meanwhile, the dragonling was secretly watching their conversation from the safety of the bag, either trying to stay hidden or plotting how to get his revenge for losing to Kong twice before. Thanks a ton for watching. If you've made it this far, drop a dope in the comments. And hey, why not check out some of the other videos popping up on the screen while we wait for the next chapters? If you'd like to support the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace.